You led us straight into that ambush. People died out there.
I didn't know they were there. It wasn't my fault.
Tracer round came through the cockpit glass 2 inches above her left knee and kept going, out the other side, through the door frame, into the night. She did not flinch. She did not look down at the hole. She pushed the cyclic forward with her right hand, dropped the little bird from 40 feet to 12 in less than 2 seconds, and counted 7 men on the wadi floor below her, 6 standing, one on his back with his left leg bent the wrong way at the middle of the thigh. The fuel gauge read 11%. The aircraft was rated for 4 passengers, and she was about to put 7 on it. She keyed the intercom once. 2 words. Get on. My name is Hatch. The pilot you just met is Chief Warrant Officer 3 Noelani Akana, call sign Lima 6, 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. The Night Stalkers, out of Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah, Georgia, by way of Hilo, Hawaii, by way of a single mother and a father who drowned in the Alan-Weha Channel on the 9th of February, 1997, when she was 6 years old. The date she put a little bird on the floor of that wadi is the 3rd of November, 2017. The place is 41 kilometers south of the Syrian-Turkish border, in a dry riverbed that does not have a name on any map I own, in a country that the United States of America was not officially fighting a war in. The man with the broken leg on the rocks below her, the one she counted as the 7th soul, the one she was not built to carry, is Chief Warrant Officer 5 Daniel McCready, 26 years in the regiment, 2 distinguished flying crosses, 4,500 hours in rotary wing aircraft, standardization pilot for the entire 160th, a legend in a community that does not give that word away. He is also the man who, 2 years and 3 months and 20 days earlier, on the 14th of July, 2015, in a briefing room in Building 6924 at Fort Campbell, Kentucky, in front of 4 other pilots and 1 operations sergeant and 1 coffee urn that was empty by the time he was done talking, looked Chief Warrant Officer 2 Noelani Akana in the face and said, and I am quoting him exactly because I have read the line in her personal logbook in her own handwriting. Wrong airframe, sweetheart. Black hawks take females. Birds don't. Birds are for shooters. She did not respond. She did not file a complaint. She did not look at the other people in the room to see who would meet her eye and who would not. She wrote the line down in her logbook that night, dated it, signed it, and went to sleep. 28 months later, she was the only aircraft in the air within range of his crash site. Sit down. Pour something. This one runs long, and I am only telling it once. The thing I want you to understand before I take you back to Hilo, before I take you back to the channel and the boat and the father, before I take you anywhere at all, is the math of what she did in the wadi. Because the rest of this story, all of it, every hour of it, is going to feel like prologue once you understand the math. The AH-6M Little Bird gun variant, the aircraft Lani Akana was flying on the night of the 3rd of November, weighs 1,996 pounds empty. Its maximum gross takeoff weight is 3,950 pounds. The difference between those two numbers, 1,954 pounds, is everything the aircraft is allowed to carry. Fuel, ammunition, pilots, passengers, equipment, all of it. 1,954 pounds. She had taken off from FOB Green Village 3 hours and 47 minutes earlier with full fuel, 62 gallons, for 115 pounds, 200 rounds of 7.62 for the minigun on her left pylon, 14 rockets in the pod on her right, and herself. She is 5'4" and weighs 128 pounds. With her flight suit and survival vest and helmet and sidearm and the small green notebook she always carried in her left thigh pocket, call it 145. By the time she put the skids down next to the burning crash site, she had burned through 49 of her 62 gallons of fuel and not a single round of ammunition, because she had not yet been cleared hot on anything. The minigun and the rockets were still on the aircraft. They counted toward her weight whether she fired them or not. Do the arithmetic with me. Empty aircraft, 1996 pounds. Remaining fuel, 13 gallons, 87 pounds. Ammunition and rockets, 390 pounds. Pilot and gear, 145 pounds. Total, on the ground in that wadi, with the rotor turning and no passengers, 2,618 pounds. She had 1,332 pounds of allowable margin before she hit the red line. Now load 7 men. 6 United States Navy SEALs. Average weight in full combat kit somewhere between 220 and 250 pounds per man. Call it 230 average, low side. 6 times 230 is 1,380 pounds. One Chief Warrant Officer 5 with an open femur fracture and the field-applied splint a SEAL corpsman had just lashed to his leg with 2 collapsible aluminum stays and 1 roll of olive drab duct tape. McCready was 6'1" and a heavy 210 in his prime. In his kit, on that night, with the splint, call him 250. Total passenger load, 1,630 pounds. Her allowable margin was 1,332. She was about to take off from a dry riverbed in northern Syria at 2,400 feet of density altitude in an aircraft designed for 4 external passengers, with 7 souls hanging off it, 298 pounds over the manufacturer's maximum gross takeoff weight, 7.5% over redline. That is the number that the after-action review I have a copy of underlines in red pen, in the handwriting of a man who I am told never used red pen for anything else in his career. 7.5%. It does not sound like much. I want you to understand what it means. It means the aircraft will fly. The rotor system on a Little Bird has more lift available than the maximum gross weight rating suggests, because the rating is built with a safety margin for civilian-style operations and pilot error and hot and high airfields and aging components. A new aircraft, well-maintained, at sea level, in cold air, can lift more than its rating. The 160th knows this. Every night Stalker pilot knows this. They do not talk about it in public, and they do not do it in training, but they know it. It means the aircraft will not fly well. Cyclic response goes sluggish. The collective wants more pitch for the same lift. The tail rotor works harder to compensate for the extra torque. Fuel burn goes up, call it 15 to 20% over book numbers. Top speed drops by 30 to 40 knots. Service ceiling collapses. You are flying a different aircraft than the one you trained on. It means you cannot auto-rotate. Not really. If the engine quits at 7% over gross with 7 people on the skids, the rotor system does not have the inertia to flare you in. You come down hard. People die. It means every input has to be perfect. She was 80 kilometers from FOB Green Village. She had 13 gallons of fuel. At normal cruise, she could cover that distance in 36 minutes and land with a 4-gallon reserve. At 7% over gross, with 7 souls on the skids, throttled back to keep the airframe in one piece, she was going to cover that distance in 78 minutes. And she was going to land, if she landed at all, with 1.8% fuel remaining. She knew all of this in the 11 seconds she sat over the wadi at 60 feet of altitude and looked at the 7 men on the rocks below her and made the decision to put the skids on the ground. I know she knew it, because the cockpit voice recorder caught her saying the words 7-5 over out loud to herself at timestamp 02:13 and 51 seconds local, 3 seconds after she keyed the radio and 7 seconds before she switched it off. She did the math out loud. She said the number. And then she went down anyway. That is the story. Everything else is just how she got to the place where that was the only thing left to do. So let me take you to Hilo. Hilo is on the east side of the big island of Hawaii, on the windward side, which means it rains. It rains a lot. It rains in a way that mainland people do not understand until they have stood in it for a week. It is not the rain of storms. It is the rain of weather that has decided to live here. 270 days a year on average. The sun comes out in the late afternoon, burns the wet pavement white for an hour, and then the clouds come back over the saddle between Mauna Kea and Mauna Loa, and the rain starts again. The Akana house was on Kilauea Avenue, 2 blocks back from the bay, painted yellow because Leilani Akana believed that a yellow house in a town that rained 270 days a year was a small daily kindness to the people who walked past it. The paint peeled. She repainted it every 3 years until her daughter shipped out in 2003, and then she let it go gray because she said there was no one to be kind to anymore who needed it. Keoki Akana was a commercial fisherman. He ran a 28-foot Aku boat out of Swayson Pier with 2 crew, mostly cousins, and he chased skipjack tuna through the channel between the Big Island and Maui, which is called Alanweha, which means in Hawaiian, great billows smashing. It is one of the worst stretches of water in the Pacific. The wind funnels between 2 14,000-foot mountains on one side and a 10,000-foot mountain on the other, and accelerates to 40 and 50 knots on days when the rest of the island is calm. The seas stand up steep and short. Small boats die there. On the 9th of February, 1997, Keoki Akana took his boat out at 4 in the morning in conditions that the harbor master later said were marginal but not prohibited. He did not come back. His boat did not come back. One of his cousins washed up on the south shore of Maui 11 days later. The other cousin and Keoki were never found. Noelani Akana was 6 years and 4 months old. I am told, and I will tell you who told me, because in this story I am going to tell you where every piece comes from, because that is the only honest way to do this. I am told by a woman named Annie Pua, who lived 3 doors down on Kilauea Avenue, and who was 68 when I spoke to her on the telephone in March of 2022, that little Lani did not cry when they told her. She sat on the wooden steps of the yellow house, and she looked at her hands for about 20 minutes, and then she went inside, and she got her father's tackle box from the back porch, and she carried it to her bedroom, and she put it under her bed, and she closed the door, and she did not come out until the next morning. Auntie Pua said, and I am quoting, "That girl never made noise about anything important. Not then, not after. The loud things in her life, she did with her hands." I wrote that down. I think about it a lot. The loud things in her life, she did with her hands. Leilani Akana took 2 jobs after Keoki died. Day shift at the front desk of the Hilo Hawaiian Hotel, 6 in the morning to 2 in the afternoon. Evening shift cleaning offices in the medical building behind the hospital, 4 to 10. Lani had a key to the yellow house from the age of 7, and she let herself in after school, and she made her own dinner, and she did her homework at the kitchen table with the radio on low, and she went to bed before her mother came home. She did not, as far as anyone has told me, ever complain about this. What she did, starting around the age of 11, was walk 3 blocks down Kilauea to a small marine repair shop run by a man named Sonny Kahananui, and she stood in the doorway and watched him work on outboard motors. She did this for about 2 weeks. Sonny ignored her. He was a man who did not waste words on children. On the 15th day, according to Sonny, who I also spoke to, in October of 2021, when he was 73 and still running the shop, he said to her, without looking up from a carburetor he was rebuilding, "You going to keep standing there? Or are you going to hold something?" She held something. She held things for him for the next 6 years. By the time she was 13, She could break down a 25-horsepower Yamaha two-stroke and put it back together without a manual. By the time she was 15, she was doing it for paying customers, and Sonny was giving her $4 an hour cash, which she gave to her mother every Friday in a folded envelope, and which her mother put in a jar in the kitchen cabinet that, by the time Lani graduated from Hilo High School in 2003, had $2,480 in it. Leilani used the money to buy her daughter a one-way plane ticket to Louisville, Kentucky, and a small brown leather suitcase, and a Bible, and a paper map of the continental United States with the route from Louisville to Fort Knox highlighted in yellow marker. Lani took the plane ticket. She took the suitcase. She left the Bible on the kitchen table. She took the map. She also took her father's tackle box, which she had kept under her bed for 10 years and which she had never opened in front of anyone. What was in it I will tell you later, because it matters, and because it shows up in this story twice. Once in 2008 in a barracks room in Alabama, and once in 2017 in the cockpit of a little bird over Syria, and you should know what it is before either of those moments arrives. For now, just hold this. A 6-year-old girl carried a wooden box upstairs and put it under her bed and did not open it for 10 years, and when she finally left home she took it with her, and it has been in her possession every day of her life since. That is the kind of person we are talking about. She enlisted on the 18th of August, 2003. She was 17 years old, which meant her mother had to sign the papers, and Leilani Akana did sign them. In the recruiting office on Kanaloa Avenue, in blue pen, without saying a word, and then she walked out to the parking lot and sat in her car for 40 minutes before she drove home. Lani did not enlist as an aviation candidate. She did not enlist with a warrant officer flight packet. She did not enlist with any guarantee at all about flying. She enlisted as a 15T. A 15T in the United States Army is a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter repairer. The mechanic, the person who fixes the aircraft, the person who climbs up on top of the rotor head at 5 in the morning in 20-degree weather with a torque wrench and retorques the Jesus nut, which is the nut that holds the entire main rotor system to the mast, which is the nut that, if it comes off, ends the aircraft and everyone on it in approximately 2 seconds. I asked one of her instructors from Advanced Individual Training at Fort Eustis, Virginia, a retired sergeant first class named Marcus Wendell, who I tracked down through the Army Aviation Association of America directory in 2021, why a kid who grew up taking apart outboard motors with her hands chose the mechanic route into Army aviation instead of going straight for a pilot slot. Wendell laughed. He laughed for about 10 seconds, which is a long time on a phone call with a stranger. Then he said, "Son, you don't understand who that girl was. She didn't trust anybody else to keep her alive in the air. She wanted to learn the aircraft from the bottom up before she let it carry her. She told me that, almost word for word, in the second week of AIT. She said, 'I'll fly it when I know what every bolt on it is for.' She spent 5 years as a Black Hawk mechanic. 5 years. Fort Campbell, then Fort Hood, then a 15-month deployment to Mosul in 2006 and 2007, where she was a crew chief on a medevac UH-60 that flew 183 missions and pulled, by the unit's own count, 241 wounded American and Iraqi personnel off the streets and rooftops of that city. She did not fly the aircraft. She maintained it. She manned the door. She ran the hoist. She did the loading. She did the unloading. She changed the filters between sorties at 3 in the morning under a red headlamp with her sleeves rolled up and her hair tucked into the back of her flight suit collar. She came home from Mosul with a combat action badge, an air medal, and a recommendation from her platoon sergeant, a man named Sergeant First Class Roy Cabrera, who I have not been able to find, and who I have been told by 2 separate people died of a heart attack in 2014 in Killeen, Texas, at the age of 46, for warrant officer flight training. She submitted the packet on the 2nd of March, 2008. She was 22 years old. She had 620 hours of maintenance test flight time, which does not count as piloting command time, but which counts as something. And she had 311 hours as a crew chief in combat conditions. And she had a recommendation from a senior NCO who was about to die without knowing he had written the most important sentence of her career, which was the last sentence of his recommendation, and which read, "This soldier does not panic." I have watched her not panic on 6 occasions when panic would have been the rational response. Recommend without reservation. The packet was approved on the 29th of April. She went to warrant officer candidate school at Fort Rucker, Alabama, in June. She was one of 47 candidates in her class. 6 were women. 3 of the 6 washed out in the first 8 weeks. 2 more washed out in primary flight school. Lani Akana finished 13th in her class of 47, was selected for H6/MH, 6 Little Bird training, which is not something you select. It is something the Army selects you for, and they select 2 or 3 pilots per year for it out of the entire warrant officer pipeline, and pinned her warrant officer 1 bar on the 11th of December, 2009. The man who pinned it on her collar was her first instructor pilot, Chief Warrant Officer Dale Bortnick, 58 years old, 3 tours in Vietnam, 12,000 hours, the kind of pilot who taught by saying almost nothing and letting the student figure out what the silence meant. Bortnick said one thing to her at the pinning ceremony, and she wrote it down in her logbook that night, and I have read it. He said, "Quiet hands. The aircraft already knows what it's doing." Hold on to that line. You are going to hear it again, in her own voice, in the cockpit of a little bird at 60 feet of altitude over a Syrian wadi, 8 years later, in the 11 seconds before she switched off the radio and went down. I need to stop here for a minute. I need to tell you something about myself, because the rest of this story is going to require you to trust me on some things that I cannot prove on camera, and you deserve to know what kind of person is asking for that trust. I did not know Noelani Akana. I have never met her. I have never spoken to her on the telephone. I have never exchanged an email with her. I have never seen her in person, and based on the agreement I made with the 6 people who did know her and who did agree to speak with me about her, I never will. What I have is this. I have a copy of the after-action review for the events of the 3rd of November, 2017, in the Euphrates River Valley sector, which was provided to me by a retired senior warrant officer of the 160th SOAR, who I will not name, who served with the regiment for 29 years, and who told me, when he handed me the document in a diner in Clarksville, Tennessee, in February of 2022, that he was giving it to me because, and I am quoting, "Somebody outside the regiment ought to know what she did, and the regiment is never going to be the one to tell them." I have her personal logbook, or rather, I have photocopies of 17 pages from her personal logbook, which were provided to me by a different person, whose name I also will not give, and which cover the period from the 14th of July, 2015, through the 5th of November, 2017. The pages include the entry from the night McCready spoke to her in Building 6924, in her handwriting, in blue pen, dated and signed. They include the entry from the night of the 3rd of November. They include 11 other entries from the months between, which I will quote from at the appropriate places in this story. I have the testimony, on the record but with names withheld, of 6 people. 3 are current or retired members of the 160th SOAR. 1 is a Navy SEAL who was on the ground in the Wadi that night. 1 is the air traffic controller at FOB Green Village who talked her in. 1 is a flight surgeon at Hunter Army Airfield who treated her for an injury that none of the official records mention, and who told me about it because, in her words, "If you are going to tell this story, you should tell all of it." and that includes the part where she bled through her flight suit for 40 minutes and did not say a word. I have a small stack of correspondence between Chief Warrant Officer 5 Daniel McCready and the Department of the Army, dated between the 7th and the 28th of November, 2017, including the addendum to the after-action review that he wrote in his own hand from a hospital bed at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center in Germany, which is 3 pages long, which recommends Chief Warrant Officer 3 Noelani Akana for the Distinguished Flying Cross, and which ends with a sentence that I am going to read to you in full at the appropriate moment and not before. I have a cardboard box. The box is 6 inches by 4 inches by 2 inches. It was mailed by United States Postal Service Priority Mail from Birmingham, Alabama, on the 11th of February, 2018, which is 11 days after Daniel McCready retired from the United States Army after 27 years of service. The return address on the box is a post office box in Birmingham. The recipient address is a unit mailbox at Hunter Army Airfield, Savannah, Georgia. The box was received and signed for on the 14th of February. Inside the box are 2 things. The first is a pair of United States Army Master Aviator wings, silver, with a wreath and a star, the device that signifies a pilot with 15 or more years of rated service and 2,000 or more hours of flight time. The wings Daniel McCready wore on his Class A uniform for the last 12 years of his career. The second is a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded in quarters, with 4 words written on it in black ink, in block capitals. I will tell you what those 4 words are at the end of this story, and not before, because the 4 words are the entire reason I am telling you this story, and if I tell you now, you will not understand them, and if I wait, you will. I do not have the box itself. The box belongs to Lani Akana. What I have is a photograph of the box, and a photograph of the wings, and a photograph of the note, which were taken by the same person who gave me the 17 pages of the logbook, with Akana's knowledge and, I am told, but cannot verify, with her permission. That is what I have. That is what this story is built on. I am not going to pretend it is more than that, and I am not going to pretend it is less. Now, back to 2009. Back to the day Dale Bortnick pinned a warrant officer bar on the collar of a 23-year-old woman from Hilo, Hawaii, and told her to keep her hands quiet because the aircraft already knew what it was doing. Because between that day and the day Daniel McCready stood in a briefing room in Building 6924 and called her sweetheart, there are 6 years that the Army has on record, and that I have on paper, and that I need you to understand. Because those 6 years are how she became the pilot who, in 11 seconds in a Syrian wadi at 2 in the morning, was capable of doing the math out loud, saying the number, switching off the radio, and going down anyway. She did not become that pilot in those 11 seconds. She became that pilot over 6 years, in places most people in this country could not find on a map and would not want to visit if they could. And the next part of this story is the slow accumulation of the hours and the lessons and the small humiliations and the smaller victories that built the woman who, on the 3rd of November, 2017, was capable of switching off a radio and going down anyway. I am going to walk you through those 6 years. Not all of them. Not minute by minute. I do not have minute by minute. What I have is the logbook pages and the testimony of 4 people who flew with her in that period, and a small handful of documents that I will name when I quote them. From those pieces, I am going to give you 11 moments. 11 moments out of 6 years. 11 moments that, taken together, build the pilot. You are going to notice that some of these moments are tiny. A conversation in a hangar. A line written in a notebook. A decision about a piece of tape. That is not a mistake of selection. That is the truth of how a pilot is built. The big moments, the combat, the saves, the close calls, those are the ones that show up on the award citation. The small moments are the ones that make the big ones possible. I am giving you both. Hold on. Bottom of your coffee cup. We are not even halfway to the wadi yet. Moment 1. Fort Rucker, Alabama. The 30th of January, 2010. She has been a warrant officer for 50 days. She has been in Little Bird training for 19 of those days. She is in a hover 10 feet over a painted square on the south training pad, with Dale Bortnick in the left seat and a 4-knot crosswind from her 2 o'clock that is trying to push the aircraft off the square. She is overcorrecting. Cyclic right, cyclic left, cyclic right. The aircraft is wobbling. The square is sliding under her in increments. Bortnick says nothing for 90 seconds. Then Bortnick reaches over with his left hand and, without warning her, pulls her right hand off the cyclic and places it on her own thigh. The aircraft, with no input on the cyclic at all, settles. It drifts 6 inches to the left. It stops. It hovers. Bortnick says, "See." She says, "Yes, sir." He puts her hand back on the cyclic. She finishes the hover. That night, she writes in her logbook, in the same blue pen she will use 7 years later in Building 6924. Bortnick took my hand off the stick. Aircraft flew itself. I was the problem. Lesson: I am almost always the problem. Solution: do less. She underlines do less twice. She is going to write those 2 words in the margin of her logbook 17 more times across her career, on dates I have in front of me. The last time she writes it is on the 2nd of November, 2017, the day before Syria, on a page that records a routine maintenance test flight of the same AH-6M. She will fly into the wadi the next night. Tail number I will not give you because the tail number is one of the few details in this story that could identify her. Do less. That is lesson 1. Moment 2. Fort Campbell, Kentucky. The 4th of August, 2010. She graduates from Little Bird Transition and is assigned, on the same day, to the 1st Battalion of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment. She is 24 years old. She is one of 2 women in the battalion. The other one is a Black Hawk pilot, 3 years senior, named CW3 Bethany Voorhees, who will become, and I am quoting Voorhees here, who I spoke to in November of 2021, the closest thing Akana had to a sister in the regiment, and not because we were the only 2, but because she was the only person I ever met who could sit in a room with me for 2 hours and say 4 words, and have all 4 of them be necessary. Voorhees said one other thing about Akana in our conversation that I am going to give you now, because it is the cleanest description of the woman I have heard from anyone, and because Voorhees is dead. She was killed in a training accident in Eglin in 2019, in a Black Hawk that hit a wire on a night low-level run, an accident that had nothing to do with Akana, and everything to do with the fact that the regiment loses pilots in training the way other units lose them in combat, and so this is the last thing she will ever say about her friend, in any public record, anywhere. Voorhees said, Lani didn't talk because she was thinking. She talked because she had something. The rest of the time, she was quiet because the room was already loud enough. You'd be in a debrief, and somebody would be running their mouth about a mission, and Lani would be in the corner not saying anything. And then 20 minutes and she'd say 1 sentence, and the sentence would end the conversation. Because she'd been listening the whole time, and she'd found the one thing nobody else had said yet. That's who she was. She was the one who said the thing nobody else had said yet. I wrote that down. I think about it almost as often as I think about Annie Pua's line. The loud things in her life, she did with her hands. The quiet things in her life, she did with 1 sentence at the end of someone else's noise. That is the pilot. Moment 3. Molly. The 17th of March, 2013. Her first combat deployment as a 160th pilot. She has been in the regiment for 31 months. She has 940 hours of flight time, of which 210 are night vision goggle hours, which is the only kind of flying the 160th really cares about. The Night Stalkers' motto is Night Stalkers Don't Quit, and their unofficial second motto, which I have heard from 3 different members of the regiment, is We own the night because nobody else wants it. She is on a 2-ship infill into a desert landing zone north of Timbuktu. Lead aircraft is an MH-6, flown by a CW-4 named Carl Erickson. Akana is wing in an AH-6 gun configuration, 2 miniguns and 12 rockets. 3 minutes from the LZ, Erickson's aircraft takes a single round of small arms fire through the left chin bubble. The round misses Erickson's leg by about 4 inches and embeds itself in the radio stack. The radio stack catches fire. Small electrical fire, contained, manageable, but Erickson now has flames coming out of his instrument panel at 1 in the morning, 2 minutes from a hot LZ, with 4 operators on the skids. Erickson does not abort. Erickson lands on the LZ. The operators dismount. Erickson takes off, climbs to 200 feet, and only then declares the emergency and starts looking for a place to put down. Akana, in the wing aircraft, has been watching all of this on her own NVGs. She has not said one word on the radio during the infill, because the infill discipline of the 160th forbids unnecessary chatter. The moment Erickson is clear of the LZ, Akana keys her radio for the first time and says, "Lead wing. I have you. I'm on your 3. Pick a spot." Erickson picks a spot, a dry lake bed about 4 kilometers from the LZ, and sets down. Akana orbits him at 300 feet for the 11 minutes it takes Erickson and his crew chief to put the fire out with a hand extinguisher and get the radios disconnected from the bus. During those 11 minutes, Akana does not say another word. She just flies a slow racetrack pattern over the downed aircraft, gun ready, eyes on the surrounding terrain through her NVGs, alone in the desert sky at 1 in the morning with one of her own on the ground. When Erickson is ready to lift, he keys the radio and says, "Wing lead. I'm coming up. Thanks for the babysit." Akana says, "Anytime lead." Then she follows him home. The official mission report on this incident is 2 paragraphs long. It mentions Akana's name once, in the second paragraph, in the sentence, "Wing aircraft, Akana, provided overwatch during emergency landing without incident." Erickson, when I spoke to him in 2022, said, "Without incident." Yeah, sure. She flew a 4,000-pound attack helicopter in tight circles over my burning aircraft in the middle of the Sahara Desert at 1 in the morning for 11 minutes, and didn't say a word, and didn't ask for relief, and didn't break orbit, and didn't request a fuel check, and didn't do anything except keep me alive. Without incident. That's the regiment for you. That's the paperwork. He laughed. It was not a happy laugh. He said, she was 26 years old. Moment 4. Fort Campbell, the 11th of June, 2014. She comes back from Mali in May with 140 hours of combat flight time added to her logbook and a quiet reputation in the battalion that I have heard described by 3 different people in 3 slightly different ways, but always with the same shape. You want her on your wing. Not in front of you. Not behind you. On your wing. Because if you get into trouble, she will be the one who does not panic, and she will be the one who flies the racetrack for 11 minutes, and she will be the one whose first radio call is the one that tells you she has you. In June of 2014, she is selected, and I want you to understand what this word means in the 160th, because it does not mean what it means in the rest of the Army. In the 160th, selected means a small group of pilots in a room above the squadron operations office decided, by name, that you were going to be given this thing, and there was no application and no sign-up and no asking. She is selected to attend the AH-6M instructor pilot course at Fort Rucker, which will qualify her at 28. years old, to teach the aircraft to other pilots in the regiment. She is the youngest instructor pilot candidate in the AH-6M program by 4 years. She is the first woman. The course is 11 weeks long. She finishes second in her class of 9. The man who finishes first, a CW3 named Tobias Renner. And yes, this is the same family as Marcus Renner, the air traffic controller, who will talk her into FOB Green Village 3 years later. They are cousins. The regiment is small that way. Tobias Renner told me in 2022 that he finished first by a margin of 1.7 percentage points across the entire grading period. He said, "She finished second because she made one navigation error on the final check ride. One. I made none. That was the difference. If she'd made no errors, she'd have beaten me, because her stick work was better than mine, and her decision-making was better than mine, and her ability to absorb information was better than mine. She was second because of one waypoint she missed by 400 meters at night in 0 Ilum. That's the kind of pilot we're talking about. The kind where she comes second, and the guy who came first knows the only reason he came first is one bad fix in 3 weeks of flying." Renner paused on the phone. Then he said, "I taught her the navigation fix she missed. After the course, I sat down with her for 2 hours and I walked her through it. She listened. She wrote it down. She thanked me. The next time we flew together, 18 months later in Iraq, she nailed it cold. Like she'd never not been able to do it." That's also the kind of pilot we're talking about. The kind where you teach her one thing one time, and it is in her forever. I wrote that down too. That is moment 4. The instructor pilot rating. The thing that, 3 years and 1 month later, will give her the technical authority to make the decision in the wadi without anybody questioning whether she had the right to make it, because by the 3rd of November, 2017, she will have signed off on the qualification of 14 other little bird pilots in the regiment, and there will be no one in the room, not McCready, not anyone, who can credibly claim that she did not know the aircraft. She did. She knew it better than almost anyone alive. Moment 5. The personal one. Fort Campbell, the 2nd of October, 2014. This one is not in any document. This one I have from one person who told me one time, off the record, and who agreed when I called her back 6 weeks later to let me put it in this video, as long as I did not name her and did not give any detail that could identify her beyond the fact that she was, in October of 2014, a civilian counselor at the Fort Campbell Family Readiness Office, and that she met with Lani Akana exactly 3 times in a 6-week period, and that the first meeting lasted 40 minutes and the second lasted 12 minutes and the third lasted 4 minutes. The reason Lani Akana went to the family readiness counselor in October of 2014 was that her mother, Leilani Akana, had been diagnosed 2 weeks earlier with stage 3 pancreatic cancer. The counselor, and I am paraphrasing here because I did not record our conversation, the counselor would not allow it, said that Akana came in on a Thursday afternoon in her flight suit, sat down in the chair across from her desk, and said, "My mother is dying. I need to know how the Army handles compassionate reassignment for warrant officers in Special Operations Aviation units." The counselor explained the process. It is not a fast process. It is not a guaranteed process. The 160th, in particular, does not release pilots easily, because the training pipeline is years long and every pilot is a multi-million-dollar investment. Akana listened. She took notes on a small green notebook she pulled from her thigh pocket. When the counselor was done, Akana said, "Thank you. I am not going to file. I wanted to know what filing would involve so I could decide whether to file. I have decided not to. Please do not put this conversation in any record." The counselor said, "I have to log that we spoke." Akana said, "Log that I came in to ask about general policy." That is true. The rest of this conversation did not happen. The counselor agreed. The second meeting, 12 minutes long, 6 days later, Akana came back to ask one follow-up question about how survivor benefits worked for an unmarried warrant officer with a surviving parent. The counselor answered it. Akana wrote it down. Akana thanked her. Akana left. The third meeting, for minutes long, 3 weeks after that, Akana came in, sat down, and said, "My mother died last Tuesday. I took bereavement leave. I am back on flight status. I am not going to need to come back here. I wanted to tell you that in person because you were kind to me and I wanted you to know I am all right. Thank you." She stood up. She shook the counselor's hand. She walked out. The counselor told me, in our conversation, that in 19 years of working with military families and soldiers and pilots and their wives and husbands and parents and children, she had never met anyone who handled a parent's death the way Lani Akana handled her mother's. She said, "I am not saying it was healthy. I am not qualified to say that. I am saying it was complete." She came in. She got the information she needed. She made her decisions. She executed them. She came back to tell me she was all right. And then she went back to flying helicopters at night. I do not know what that costs a person. I think it costs a lot. I do not think she ever sent the bill to anyone. Noelani Akana died on the 28th of October, 2014, in Hilo Medical Center, with her sister and a hospice nurse holding her hands. Lani Akana flew home for the funeral on the 31st of October, stayed for 4 days, signed paperwork, sold the yellow house on Kilauea Avenue to a young couple from Honolulu for $340,000, took her father's tackle box out of the closet where her mother had kept it for 11 years, and flew back to Fort Campbell on the 5th of November. She was back on the flight schedule on the 7th. Her logbook entry for the 7th of November, 2014, and I have this page in front of me, reads, in full, night low level, 1.7 hours, aircraft 0438, cold, quiet hands, good flight. That is all. No mention of her mother. No mention of the funeral. No mention of anything except the flight. I want you to hold that against the entry from the 14th of July, 2015, 8 months and 7 days later, when she sat down in her barracks room after McCready called her sweetheart in a briefing room and wrote a full paragraph, in her own hand, recording the exact words and the date and the names of the witnesses. The mother's death gets one line. Good flight. The insult gets a paragraph. I am not going to tell you what that means. I am going to let you sit with it. I am going to move on to Moment 6. Moment 6. Erbil, Iraq. The 22nd of March, 2015. Her second combat deployment. For months at a small forward operating base on the Kurdish side of the line, supporting a task force whose name I am not going to give you and whose mission I am going to describe only in the broadest terms. Because some of the people who were on the receiving end of that mission are dead, and some of the people who delivered it are still alive, and some of the people who delivered it would prefer to remain so. She is flying the AH-6M gun variant. She has just over 1,400 hours total time, for 110 of them night vision, 190 of them combat. She is, by any honest measure, in the top quartile of pilots in her battalion. She is also, in this period, beginning to be talked about by the senior warrant officers in the squadron as a candidate for the standardization pilot track, which is the track that produces the men, they had always been men, who certify other pilots fit to fly the aircraft. On the night of the 22nd of March, she is on a 2-ship overwatch for a ground element conducting a sensitive site exploitation about 60 kilometers northwest of Mosul, in a village whose name I am going to leave out, in territory that was at that time nominally held by the Islamic State. The ground element is on the objective for 42 minutes. In the 38th minute, the element takes contact from 3 buildings simultaneously on the north edge of the village. They request immediate suppressive fire. The lead little bird, MH6 configuration, has no guns. It is a transport variant. It can do nothing except orbit and report. The wing aircraft, Akana, in the AH-6 gun variant, has 2 miniguns, 12 rockets, and approximately 90 seconds before the ground element is going to start taking casualties. The targeting problem is this. The 3 buildings are within 30 meters of 2 other buildings that are confirmed civilian occupied. The ground element's grid call gives Akana a target box that includes the civilian structures. The rules of engagement in effect that night require positive identification of hostile fire from a specific structure before that structure can be engaged. Akana has positive identification of hostile fire from one of the 3 buildings. She does not have positive identification from the other 2. She has 87 seconds. She makes the call. She engages the 1 building she is PID on. 2 rocket pairs and approximately 400 rounds of 7.62. The building is destroyed. The fire from that building stops immediately. She does not engage the other 2 buildings. The fire from the other 2 buildings continues. The ground element takes 2 casualties, 1 wounded, 1 killed, in the next 4 minutes, until close air support arrives in the form of an F-15E that drops a 500-pound bomb on each of the other 2 structures. The wounded operator survives. The dead operator was 26 years old. He was a ranger out of 3rd Battalion. His name does not matter for this story, and I am not going to give it. The debrief, the next morning, is bad. The ground force commander, a ranger captain, comes into the debrief room hot. He believes, and he says, on the record, in front of 7 other people, that Akana could have engaged all 3 buildings, that she made a conservative call, that her conservative call cost a man his life, that the rules of engagement give the pilot discretion in dynamic situations, and that her discretion was wrong. Akana sits across the table from him. She listens to him for 11 minutes without interrupting. When he is done, she opens her notebook, the same small green one, and she reads back to him, verbatim, his own ground element's initial grid call. Then she reads back to him the rules of engagement paragraph that was in effect that night, by section and subsection. Then she says, and this is from the official debrief transcript which I have a partial copy of. Sir, I had PID on 1 structure. I engaged that structure. I did not have PID on the other 2. I do not engage structures I do not have PID on. If the rules of engagement are wrong, the rules of engagement should be changed. If my judgment of PID is wrong, my judgment should be reviewed. I am prepared for either review. I am not prepared to accept the characterization that my decision was conservative. My decision was correct under the rules I was given. I am sorry about your man. I am not sorry about the call. She closes the notebook. The ranger captain stares at her for a long time. Then he says, "Understood, Chief." He stands up. He walks around the table. He extends his hand. She shakes it. He walks out of the room. The debrief ends. That night, Akana writes in her logbook, "Lost a ranger. Did the right thing." Both are true. Lesson: the right thing does not feel like the right thing. Do it anyway. Do less. That is moment 6. I want you to hold it next to the moment in the wadi. In Iraq, she did not engage. The rules said no, and a man died, and she did not engage, and she was right. In Syria, she did engage. The rules said no, and 7 men were going to die, and she engaged, and she was right. Same pilot, same notebook, same 2 words at the bottom of the page. Do less. The trick of her career, and I do not think she ever sat down and articulated this to anyone, including herself, but I think it is what she did, was knowing the difference between less meaning fewer trigger pulls and less meaning fewer reasons not to act. In the village outside Mosul, less meant don't shoot the buildings you cannot see into. In the wadi outside the Syrian border, less meant don't listen to the voice on the radio telling you the aircraft is not rated for it. Both were the same word. That is the pilot. Moment 7. The herbal pause. The 14th of March, 2017. This is the one I told you about in the outline. The one where she and McCready sit in the same room for 8 hours and do not speak. I am going to give it to you now in more detail because I have a witness, and the witness gave me detail. The witness is a flight engineer, a senior NCO, who I will identify only as a master sergeant who at the time was attached to the squadron operations cell at FOB Erbil. He is now retired and living in eastern Tennessee. He spoke to me on condition that I not use his name and that I not describe him further than what I just did. The setup, weather closed in on the morning of the 14th of March, 2017. Low ceilings, blowing dust, no flying. A two-ship of little birds, McCready leading, Akana wing, had been scheduled to launch at 0400 for a milk run resupply hop to a partner force compound about 40 minutes south. The launch was scrubbed at 0330. The pilots were told to stand by in the operations building in case the weather lifted. The weather did not lift for 8 hours. McCready and Akana sat in the same small room. The master sergeant called it the pilot lounge, but really it was a converted storage closet with 2 couches and a coffee pot. From approximately 0340 in the morning until approximately noon, when the mission was officially scrubbed for the day. The master sergeant was in and out of the room during that period. He estimates he was physically present in the room for approximately 3 of those 8 hours, in various intervals. In the 3 hours he was present, he heard McCready and Akana exchange exactly 19 words. He counted them later, when he was telling the story to his wife, because he could not believe the number was as low as it was. 19. The words were, Akana, when McCready entered the room at 0345, sir. McCready, returning the acknowledgement. Chief. McCready at approximately 0500, pointing at the coffee pot. Fresh. Akana, made it 20 minutes ago. McCready, thanks. McCready, at approximately 0730, looking at the weather screen on the wall, not lifting. Akana, no, sir. McCready at approximately 0900, when the master sergeant came in with a status update. Anything? Akana, when the master sergeant left, still socked. McCready, yeah, that is 19 words. 8 hours. 2 pilots. 1 coffee pot. 19 words. The master sergeant told me. I have been in the army for 26 years. I have seen quiet rooms. I have seen tense rooms. I have seen rooms where 2 people who hated each other had to sit in close quarters for a long time. This was not any of those. This was something else. They were not angry at each other. They were not avoiding each other. They were operating in the same space, and they had decided, both of them, separately, that they did not owe each other one extra word. And neither of them was going to be the one who broke that. Not over coffee. Not over weather. Not over anything. He paused. He said, I think both of them were proud of it. In a weird way. Like it was a discipline. Like neither of them was going to lose the discipline first. I asked him, did you know about the briefing room in 2015? He said, no, not then. I found out later. After the wadi. Somebody told me. And then the 8 hours in Erbil made a different kind of sense. I asked him, what kind of sense? He thought about it for a while. Then he said, she was making him sit with it. Without ever saying it. She wasn't punishing him. She wasn't going to give him the relief of pretending it hadn't happened. He could have said anything in those 8 hours. Anything at all. Sorry. Or how's your mother? Or do you remember that briefing? Anything. And she would have, I think, met him there. She was that kind of person. But he had to be the one. And he didn't. And so they sat there for 8 hours and they drank coffee and they said 19 words. And that's what it cost him. 8 hours of sitting in the same room with somebody he had insulted in front of witnesses 2 years earlier, and knowing she was going to outweigh him, and knowing she had outweighed him, and knowing he was going to walk out of that room having lost something he could not name. He said, "I think about that sometimes." So do I. Moment 8. Hunter Army Airfield. The 19th of June, 2017. For months and 5 days before Syria, she gets her CW3 promotion. Chief Warrant Officer 3. 12 years of warrant officer service. The promotion is not a surprise. She has been on the list for 14 months, and the ceremony is small. Her commanding officer pins the new bar on. There are 7 people in the room. There is a cake from the commissary. There is coffee. She does not invite anyone from off-post. Her mother is dead. Her father has been dead for 20 years. She does not have siblings. There is nobody to fly in for the ceremony. After the cake, she goes back to her office in the squadron operations building, sits down at her desk, opens the bottom drawer, takes out her father's tackle box, which I told you she had carried with her since she was 16, and opens it. I have not, to be clear, ever seen the inside of the tackle box, but Bethany Voorhees did. Once. In November of 2017, after the Wadi, when Akana was in the small hospital wing at Hunter being treated for the injury that does not appear in any official record, and Voorhees was sitting with her, and Akana had asked Voorhees to bring her some personal items from her quarters, and the tackle box was one of the things she asked for. Voorhees opened it. Voorhees told me what was in it. This was in 2018, during the conversation I had with her that included the line about Lani being the one who said the thing nobody else had said yet. It was the last thing she told me before we hung up. She said it almost as an afterthought, and then she paused, and then she said, "Hatch, you can put that in if you ever tell this story." She doesn't care anymore. She told me once she didn't care who knew. So I am going to tell you. Inside the tackle box, Voorhees said, were these things. A folded marine chart of the Alan Wehad Channel, water-stained, with a single pencil mark on it about 3 miles offshore of the Hamakua coast. The pencil mark was in her father's handwriting and was dated, in a different hand, her mother's, February 9th, 1997, last known position. A small wooden lure carved by her father from koa wood, with a hand-painted silver and blue body, the kind of lure that an Aku fisherman carried for luck and never actually used. The paint was chipped. The hook had been removed at some point. A photograph of her father holding her, age maybe 3, on the deck of his boat, both of them squinting in the sun. The photograph was creased down the middle from being folded. A photograph of her mother in the doorway of the yellow house on Kilauea Avenue, taken from the street, in the rain, holding an umbrella. The umbrella was yellow. The date stamped on the back of the photograph by the developer was June of 2003, 2 months before Lani enlisted. A small notebook, blue cover, about 3 by 5 inches, with handwritten entries on every page. The entries were in 2 different hands. The first hand was her father's. The entries in his hand were navigation notes, weather observations, fishing locations, the kind of working notebook that a commercial fisherman kept. The first entry was dated 1989. The last entry in his hand was dated February 7th, 1997, 2 days before he died. The entry said, "Wind dropping. Try the channel Sunday if it holds." The second hand was Lani's. The second hand had picked up the notebook in 1998 when she was 7 years old and had continued writing in it. On the next blank page, every year, on the 9th of February, the anniversary of her father's death. There were 20 entries in her hand, dated from the 9th of February, 1998 to the 9th of February, 2017. Voorhees did not read all of them. Voorhees read one. The entry from the 9th of February, 2008. Lani would have been 22. She would have been in advanced individual training at Fort Eustis, learning to fix Black Hawks. The entry read, in full, "Dad, I am learning the machines. I am learning them from the inside. I will know them before I trust them with my life. I will know them better than the men who built them. You did not know your boat that way. I am not blaming you. I am just telling you. I will not go down the way you went down. If I go down, it will be because I chose it, not because the machine surprised me. I love you, Lani." Voorhees said she closed the notebook after reading that one entry. She said she sat with it for a while. She said she put it back in the box and closed the box and did not look at any of the other entries, because the one entry was enough, and because she felt that she had already trespassed further than she had been invited. I do not know what the other 19 entries say. Neither does anyone else, except Lani Akana. But you should hold the 2008 entry in your head, because it is the only piece of writing by her that I have access to where she addresses anyone other than herself, and where she states, in her own words, the philosophy that is going to govern everything she does in the cockpit for the next 9 years and 3 months and 24 days until the night of the 3rd of November, 2017. I will know them better than the men who built them. If I go down, it will be because I chose it, not because the machine surprised me. That is the pilot. That is what she opened the tackle box and looked at, alone in her office at Hunter Army Airfield, on the day she pinned on CW3. She closed the box. She put it back in the drawer. She went home. Moment 9. The Sergeant Major. Hunter Army Airfield. The 14th of August, 2017. 81 days before Syria. She is approached, in the parking lot outside the Squadron Operations Building, by Sergeant Major Theodore Krashevsky, the senior enlisted advisor for the battalion, who is 53 years old, who has been in the Army for 31 years, 22 of them in the regiment, and who is known throughout the 160th by the nickname Ski, because almost nobody outside of Krashevsky's immediate family can pronounce his last name on the first try, and because he gave up correcting people in 1994. Ski stops her at her car. He says, "Chief, got a minute?" She says, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He says, "Walk with me." They walk to the edge of the parking lot, where there is a low concrete wall facing the flight line. They sit on the wall. Ski says, "You know we're sending a package to CENTCOM in October." She says, "I'd heard, Sergeant Major." He says, "You're on the list. 2-ship AH, 6-element, attached to a SEAL task unit, sensitive area, can't say more here." She says, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He says, "McCrady's leading the element." She does not say anything. Ski lets the silence sit. After a while, he says, "I know about Building 6924. She does not say anything. Ski says, "I have known about Building 6924 since the week it happened. Halberstam told me. Halberstam was wrong to tell me without your permission, and I told him so. And that's between him and me. But I have known. For 2 years and 1 month. She does not say anything. Ski says, "I am not asking you if you can fly with him. I know you can fly with him. I have watched you fly with him for 2 years. I am asking you something different. I am asking you if there is anything you want me to do about the assignment. Because if there is, I will do it. I will pull you off the package. I will pull him off the package. I will pull both of you off the package. I will reassign the entire element. I have the authority, and I will use it. But I will not use it without asking you first. Because it is your call. Not mine. Not his. Yours." This is the longest thing Sergeant Major Krashevsky has said to her in 3 years of working in the same battalion. She thinks about it for, by his count, about 40 seconds. Then she says, "Sergeant Major, I appreciate you asking. I do not want you to do anything. He is a good pilot. I am a good pilot. If we go down range together, we will fly the mission. That is the job. I do not want the assignment changed." Ski says, "All right." He stands up. He says, "One more thing, Chief." She says, "Sergeant Major." He says, "If he ever talks to you like that again, in a briefing room or anywhere else, you tell me. You don't have to do anything about it. You just tell me. I will handle it. That is also the job. Mine, not yours." She looks at him for a long time. Then she says, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He nods. He walks back to his truck. He drives away. She sits on the concrete wall for another 11 minutes, looking at the flight line. She writes in her logbook that night, "Ski offered to pull me from the package. Said no. He is the kind of man this army should have more of. He asked. He did not assume. He did not decide for me. Lesson: when you have authority, ask first. Almost always ask first. Do less. Do less." For the 17th time in her logbook, 81 days before the Wadi. Moment 10. Pre-deployment. Hunter Army Airfield. The 4th of October, 2017. 30 days before Syria. The two-ship element does a full mission profile rehearsal at the Hunter Ranges at night against a mock-up target compound the engineers have built on a remote corner of the airfield to approximate the Syrian site. The SEAL element they will be supporting flies down from Virginia Beach for the rehearsal. The SEAL team leader is the same man who will be on the ground in the Wadi. Lieutenant Commander Eric Vandermeer, call sign Bishop, 6'2", 210 pounds, 3 deployments as a platoon commander, the kind of officer who is described by his enlisted men, when nobody is listening, as the guy you would follow into anything because he will not get you killed for a stupid reason. Vandermeer meets Akana for the first time in the planning bay at 0700 on the 4th of October. He sticks out his hand. He says, "Bishop." She shakes it. She says, "Lani." He says, "McCready tells me you're the best stick in the battalion." She does not react to this. She says, "McCready is generous." Vandermeer watches her face for about 2 seconds. He has, by his own account, no idea what is going on between his lead pilot and his wing pilot. He has not been told. He will not be told until after the Wadi. He says, "All right, walk me through your contingencies." She walks him through her contingencies. The rehearsal goes well. The two-ship element executes the mission profile 3 times that night against the mock compound, in increasing levels of simulated difficulty. On the 3rd iteration, the rehearsal coordinator throws a simulated lead aircraft loss at them. Engine failure on McCready's MH-6 at the egress point, and Akana, without missing a beat, breaks off the wing position, descends to the simulated crash site, and executes a notional pickup of McCready's notional surviving crew. The rehearsal coordinator, an Army major from the training cell, watches her do this and then says, on the after-action net, "Wing. Confirm. You're picking up 4 packs on an AH-6. Akana says, "Confirmed." The major says, "That's over gross." Akana says, "Yes, sir." The major says, "You're notionally over gross by approximately 300 pounds. Akana says, "Yes, sir. I am notionally going to take off anyway." There is a long pause on the radio. The major says, "Roger. Continue the exercise." She continues the exercise. Vandermeer hears this exchange on the net. He does not say anything at the time. He brings it up the next morning at the post-rehearsal debrief. He says, "Chief, the pickup last night, 300 over gross. Talk to me about that." She says, "Sir, the aircraft will fly at 300 over gross. It will not fly well. It will not fly far, but it will fly. If the alternative is leaving people on the ground in a contested area, I will take the aircraft over gross." He says, "How much over gross will the aircraft fly?" She says, "It depends. Density, altitude, fuel state, wind, condition of the airframe. In ideal conditions, I have personally flown an AH 6 at 420 pounds over the published max gross, in a controlled test at Rucker in 2014 during the IP course. It flew. It was unpleasant. It flew. He says, "What's the upper limit?" She says, "Sir, I do not know the upper limit. The manufacturer does not publish an upper limit. The published max gross has a safety margin built in. The aircraft can exceed it by some amount. How much, in the field, in real conditions, is a judgment call. I have not been in a situation where I had to push it past 420. If I am ever in that situation, I will make the call at the time." Vandermeer looks at her for a long moment. Then he says, "All right, Chief. Good answer." He moves on to the next item. I have a copy of the debrief notes. The exchange takes up 4 lines of the transcript. 30 days later, in the Wadi, she pushed the aircraft to 550 pounds over published max gross, which is 130 pounds beyond the limit she had personally tested in controlled conditions at Rucker 3.5 years earlier. She made the call at the time, just like she told Vandermeer she would. Moment 11. The night before. FOB Green Village, Syria. The 2nd of November, 2017. 2240 hours local. This is the last moment before the moment. The mission brief has just ended. The 2-ship element will launch at 0100. The SEAL team is already in position at a hide site about 8 kilometers from the target compound, having been inserted 48 hours earlier by a ground convoy from a partner force base further north. The brief covered the route, the threats, the contingencies, the weather, the moon phase, the radio frequencies, the call signs, the abort criteria, the fuel plan, and the medevac plan. It lasted 55 minutes. McCready ran it. Akana sat in the second row and took notes. At the end of the brief, McCready said the words that 160th flight leads have been saying at the end of mission briefs since 1981. Anything else? Nobody had anything else. He said, "All right. Pre-flight at 0030. Wheels up at 0100. Don't be late." The pilots filed out. Akana went to the small pilot's tent that was hers for the deployment, a canvas structure about 10 feet by 10 feet with a cot, a small table, a folding air, a battery-powered lantern, and a footlocker. She sat down on the cot. She took her boots off. She took her flight suit zipper down to her waist. She pulled the small green notebook out of her left thigh pocket. She wrote one entry. I have this page. The entry, in full, dated November 2nd, 17, 2247L. Brief was clean. Ran it well. Plan is good. Fuel is tight on the egress leg if we have to hold long. I will carry the egress in my head as a margin problem and adjust at the time. Bishop is steady. His element is steady. The compound is what it is. We will see what the night gives us. Quiet hands. Aircraft nose. Do less. Then, on the next line, in smaller handwriting, almost as an afterthought. 20 years, 3 months, 24 days since Dad. I am where I am supposed to be. Good night. She closed the notebook. She put it on the small table. She turned off the lantern. She lay down on the cot in her flight suit with her boots off and her sidearm on the table next to her notebook and the small wooden lure from her father's tackle box, which she had taken out of the box before she deployed and put in her flight suit pocket, and which she carried on every combat sortie of her career, and which is still, as far as I have been able to determine, in her possession today, in her right hand. She fell asleep at, by her own later account to the flight surgeon at Hunter, approximately 2,300 hours. She slept for 1 hour and 40 minutes. She woke at 0040, washed her face from a 5-gallon water jug outside her tent, brushed her teeth, put her boots back on, zipped her flight suit, holstered her sidearm, put the lure back in her thigh pocket on top of the notebook, picked up her helmet, and walked across the gravel to the flight line. The wadi was 2 hours and 13 minutes away. I am going to stop the chronology here for a minute. I want to tell you what was happening on the ground, in the wadi, in the 11 minutes before she got there, because the radio call she heard at 0213 and 48 seconds local, the call that put her over the burning crash site at 60 feet of altitude with her own life and 7 other lives in her hands, did not come from nowhere. It came from a man named Eric Vandermeer, call sign Bishop, lying on his back in a dry riverbed in northern Syria, with a piece of rotor blade embedded in the meat of his left calf, looking up through his NVGs at a sky that contained, as far as he knew, exactly one functional rotary wing aircraft within 100 kilometers. The mission, up to that point, had gone according to plan. The two-ship Element launched from Green Village at 0100. McCready led. Akana flew wing in a loose echelon right, about 200 meters back and 50 feet higher, because that was the formation that gave her the best fields of fire if anything popped up on the route. The route was a low-level run, 200 feet AGL, navigating by GPS and terrain. There was no moon. The moon had set at 2346 hours the previous evening, and the only ambient light was starlight, which is more than enough for NVGs but invisible to the naked eye. The aircraft were running blacked out. No NAV lights. No anti-collision strobe. Nothing visible from the ground without optics. They crossed the Euphrates at 0128, about 40 kilometers south of the target compound. They turned northeast. They followed a dry wadi system for the next 35 minutes, which gave them terrain masking against any radar threats in the area. They popped up to 400 feet for the final approach at 0203. The SEAL Element, 6 men plus Bishop, was already at the objective. They had walked in from their hide site over the previous 4 hours. They had been on the compound for 18 minutes by the time the helicopters arrived. They had cleared the compound. They had recovered what they came to recover, and I am not going to tell you what that was, because it does not matter for this story, and because I do not actually know, and they were ready for exfil. The exfil plan was textbook. McCready's MH-6 would land in the wadi about 300 meters east of the compound. Akana's AH-6 would orbit overhead and provide overwatch with the miniguns and rockets. The SEAL Element would walk to the LZ, for would board McCready's bird. The other 3, including Bishop, would walk back another 200 meters to a secondary LZ where a second flight of 2 MH-6s, which had launched from Green Village 45 minutes after the first Element, and which were inbound and about 14 minutes out, would pick them up. The reason for 2 pickup waves was simple weight management. An MH-6 carries 4 external passengers comfortably. 6 SEALs plus the team leader was 7. You need 2 birds. The plan was good. The plan failed at 0213 and 22 seconds local, when McCready's MH-6, in the final 10 feet of its descent into the Wadi LZ, took a single round of small arms fire, almost certainly from a lone shooter on the ridgeline to the north, who had not been on anyone's threat picture and who was, in all probability, not part of any organized force, but simply a man with a rifle who heard a helicopter in his country at 2 in the morning and shot at it, through the tail rotor. Drive shaft, about 4 feet forward of the tail rotor gearbox. The drive shaft did not fail immediately. It failed 11 seconds later, when McCready, sensing something wrong in the pedals, attempted to abort the landing and add power. When the drive shaft failed, the tail rotor stopped. When the tail rotor stopped, the torque from the main rotor, with no anti-torque to counter it, spun the aircraft to the right. McCready had perhaps 1.5 seconds to react. He chopped the throttle, which removed the torque problem, but which also removed his lift. The aircraft fell the last 12 feet to the wadi floor in an uncontrolled descent and impacted hard on the right skid. The right skid collapsed. The aircraft rolled onto its right side. The The main rotor blades struck the ground and disintegrated, sending fragments of carbon fiber and aluminum across a 30-meter radius. One of those fragments hit Bishop in the left calf, which is how Bishop ended up on his back in the wadi with a piece of rotor blade in his leg. The fuel cell, which on the little bird is located under the pilot's seat, ruptured. JP-8 sprayed across the hot engine exhaust. The aircraft caught fire approximately 4 seconds after impact. McCready was unconscious in the cockpit. His crew chief, a staff sergeant whose name I am not going to give you, because he is still on active duty and because the role he played in the next 90 seconds was extraordinary and deserves its own telling on a different day, was thrown clear on impact and broke his left collarbone and 3 ribs, but remained conscious. The crew chief crawled back to the burning aircraft, reached into the cockpit, cut McCready's harness with the rescue hook on his survival vest, and dragged McCready out of the fire by the drag handle on the back of his survival vest, breaking McCready's left femur in the process when McCready's leg caught on the collective lever on the way out. The crew chief dragged McCready 20 meters from the burning aircraft, laid him down behind a rock outcropping, and only then keyed his radio. What the crew chief said on the radio, on the SEAL team's tactical frequency, at 0213 and 46 seconds local, 2 seconds before Akana heard it, was this: "Lead us down. Let us down. 6 is alive. 6 has a broken leg and is unconscious. I am hit but mobile. We have fire." Bishop, on the ground, with rotor blade in his calf, keyed his own radio at 0213 and 48 seconds and said, "Wing Bishop, you copy." And 200 meters and 300 feet above the burning aircraft, in the cockpit of the only flying helicopter within 80 kilometers of that wadi, Chief Warrant Officer 3 Noelani Akana, who had heard the crew chief's call and was already descending, keyed her radio and said, "Bishop Wing, I copy. I'm coming down." That was 0213 and 51 seconds. 3 seconds after that, off the radio, on the cockpit voice recorder, alone, she said the words I told you about at the beginning. 7-5 over. She said it as a statement of fact, not a question, not a complaint, not a prayer. A statement of fact about the math of what she was about to do. 7.5% over red line. For seconds after that, she switched off the radio. She did not switch it off because she did not want to talk to anyone. She switched it off because she did not want anyone to talk to her. Because there was a chance, a small chance, but a real one, that somebody at Green Village, hearing the call, was going to come up on the net and tell her to hold off, to wait for the second wave, to not put her aircraft on the ground in a contested LZ next to a burning crash. And she did not want to hear that, because if she heard it, she would have to answer it. And if she answered it, she would have to either obey it or disobey it. And the only way to take that decision off the table was to not hear it in the first place. So she switched off the radio. The cockpit voice recorder kept running. It records the internal audio of the aircraft regardless of radio state. The next thing it captured, 11 seconds later, was Akana's voice, very quiet, almost a whisper, saying one sentence to herself. "I am going to give you the sentence in a minute. First, I am going to tell you what she did in those 11 seconds. In 11 seconds, she did the following. She descended from 300 feet to 60 feet. She brought the airspeed from 80 knots to a stationary hover. She positioned the aircraft 15 meters west of the burning MH-6, upwind of the fire, where the rotor wash would push smoke and embers away from the LZ rather than over it. She did a visual scan of the wadi floor through her NVGs and counted bodies. She counted 7 moving: Bishop, the crew chief, 4 of the original assault element, and one of the men who was supposed to be at the secondary LZ, but who had run back when the crash happened, and 1 not moving, which was McCready, behind the rock where the crew chief had laid him. She did a visual scan of the ridgelines, north and south, for muzzle flashes. She saw none. Either the lone shooter from the ridge had moved, or had decided one helicopter was enough for one night, or had been killed by the SEALs in the 11 seconds between the crash and her arrival. She did not know which. She decided it did not matter. She checked her fuel. 13 gallons. She did the egress math in her head. She got the same number I gave you at the beginning of this video. 1.8% on landing at Green Village, assuming everything went right. She looked at her own hands on the controls. She made sure they were quiet. And then, into the empty cockpit, with the radio off and the rotor turning and 7 men on the rocks below her, she said, "Dad, I am choosing this." That is the sentence. 3 seconds later, she brought the collective down and put the skids on the ground. There is something I need you to understand about putting a little bird on the ground next to a burning helicopter. The fire from a crashed little bird, fed by ruptured JP, 8 fuel cells, runs hot. 800 to 1,000 degrees Celsius at the core of the flame, and it produces a column of superheated air that rises straight up and then mushrooms out at altitude. If you fly into that column with another helicopter, the rotor system will experience a sudden, violent change in air density. Lift will drop. The aircraft will sink. If you are close to the ground, the aircraft will hit. This is called settling with power, and it has killed more helicopter pilots than enemy fire has, by a margin of about 4-1. Akana knew this. She did not fly into the column. She positioned upwind, 15 meters off, and she came in at an angle that kept her rotor disc in clean air the entire descent. This is the kind of decision a pilot makes in less than a second, without thinking about it, because thinking about it would take longer than the situation allows. The skids touched at 02:14 and 22 seconds. The crew chief, who had been kneeling next to McCready behind the rock, looked up when he heard her coming in, recognized the wing aircraft, and started yelling at the SEALs. He was yelling, "On the bird! On the bird! On the bird!" The SEALs moved. This is something else I want you to understand. The SEALs who had been on that compound were operators with, on average, 11 years of service and 4 to 6 combat deployments each. They had been in firefights before. They had been in crashes before. They had been on bad LZs before. They did not panic. They did not hesitate. The moment they saw the wing aircraft on the ground, they moved toward it, in a controlled column, weapons at low ready, eyes on the ridge lines. But they did not all move toward the aircraft. 2 of them, and this is in the after-action review and was confirmed by Bishop in his own debrief, moved instead toward McCready, because the crew chief was injured and could not carry McCready alone, and because no SEAL was going to leave a downed Army pilot on a rock next to a burning aircraft. Bishop, with rotor blade in his calf, dragged himself to a position about 10 meters from Akana's aircraft and went down on one knee with his rifle up, providing the only overwatch that was going to be provided in that wadi, because Akana could not leave the cockpit and the crew chief was attending to McCready and the other SEALs were either lifting McCready or boarding the aircraft. The lift onto the aircraft took 91 seconds. This is in the AAR. 91 seconds. 6 SEALs onto the skids, 3 per side, holding onto the external skid platforms that the little bird carries for exactly this purpose: fast rope insertions and emergency exfils. 2 SEALs and the crew chief lifting McCready and getting him onto the small cargo platform behind the pilot's seat, which is not designed to carry a human being, but which is the only place on an AH-6 that an unconscious man with a broken femur can be secured. They secured him with 2 cargo straps and a section of climbing rope. The crew chief got onto the left skid platform with the SEALs. Bishop, on his one good leg, hopped to the right skid, grabbed the platform with his left hand, swung himself up, and got on. At 02:15 and 53 seconds, The crew chief, who was now on the left skid, looking into the cockpit, gave Akana a thumbs up. Akana saw it. She did not give one back. She brought the radio back on. She keyed it once. She said, in a voice that the cockpit recorder captured as completely level and almost conversational. Green Village, Lima 6. 7 souls. Departing the LZ. Inbound your location. Estimating 0333 local. Fuel critical. Request emergency vehicles standing by. There was a pause of about 2 seconds on the other end. Then the air traffic controller at Green Village, Marcus Renner, who I told you about, the cousin of the IP from Rucker, keyed back. Renner said, Lima 6, Green Village. Roger 7 souls. Emergency vehicles will be standing by. Say your fuel state. Akana said, 11% and dropping. I will land with what I land with. Renner said, Roger. We are clearing the airspace for you. You are cleared direct, any altitude, any heading. Come home. Akana said, coming home. She brought the collective up. The aircraft did not lift. I want you to sit with that for a second. The aircraft did not lift. The skids stayed on the ground. The rotor was turning at full operating RPM. The collective was at the upper stop of its travel, and the aircraft did not lift. She was 7.5% over gross. The aircraft was telling her it knew. She brought the collective down half an inch. She nudged the cyclic forward. She brought the collective back up. This time, instead of trying to lift straight up, which the aircraft could not do at that weight, she translated forward on the cyclic and used ground effect and forward airspeed to generate the extra lift that the rotor alone could not produce in a stationary hover. This is called a running takeoff. It is a technique most often used in mountain flying or hot and high operations, where the aircraft does not have enough power to hover out of ground effect. It is not, normally, a technique used in combat exfils, because it requires usable ground in front of the aircraft. The wadi floor in front of her was approximately 140 meters of relatively flat, rocky ground, with the burning MH-6 to her right rear. She used 112 of those meters. The aircraft accelerated. The skids dragged. At about 60 meters, the skids came off the ground by an inch or two. At about 90 meters, they were a foot off the ground. At 112 meters, the aircraft was at 12 feet of altitude, 50 knots of airspeed, and climbing, and she banked gently to the south and pointed the nose at the long, dark, 80-kilometer line between her and FOB Green Village. Bishop, on the right skid, told me, when I spoke to him in 2022, after he had retired from the Navy as a commander and was living in North Carolina and was, in his words, old enough now to talk about some of this stuff, that the takeoff was the longest 17 seconds of his career. He said, we were on the skids and we could feel the aircraft fighting. You could feel it. The whole airframe was vibrating in a way I had never felt in a helicopter before, like it was straining against something. And nobody on the skids was saying anything. We were all just hanging on. And I remember thinking, very clearly, if she pulls this off, it will be the greatest piece of flying I have ever seen in my life. And then I remember thinking, if she doesn't pull this off, I am going to die on a Syrian rock with a piece of someone else's helicopter in my leg. And then we were in the air. And I looked into the cockpit through the side window, and I could see her face in the glow of the instruments. And her face had no expression on it at all. None. She was just flying. He paused. He said, I have thought about that face for 5 years. The no expression. I have decided what it was. It was the face of somebody who had decided. Like, the deciding was over. The deciding had happened on the ground. Now there was just the flying. And the flying was easy for her, because she had decided. The hard part wasn't the flying. The hard part was the deciding. And she had done that part in 11 seconds with the radio off. I asked him, Did you know about Building 6924? He said, not that night. I learned later. McCready told me, in the hospital in Germany, 3 weeks after. He cried when he told me. He told me what he had said to her in that briefing room. And he told me she had flown him out of Syria on the skids of an aircraft she had to fight off the ground because she was overgrossed by 300 pounds because of him. And he asked me, Bishop, he asked me, what kind of man does that make him? And I did not have a good answer for him. I still don't. I don't know what kind of man that makes him. I know what kind of pilot it makes her, but I don't know what kind of man it makes him. I sat with that one for a long time after the call. I am still sitting with it. I do not have a good answer either. But I am going to tell you, before this video is over, the 4 words that McCready wrote on the yellow sheet of legal paper that he mailed to her with his Master Aviator wings on the 11th of February, 2018, because the 4 words are, I think, as close to an answer as McCready himself was able to come. We are not there yet. There is still the flight home. There is still the landing at Green Village. There is still the thing that happened in the last 6 minutes of the flight that almost killed all 8 of them. There is still what McCready did when he woke up in the hospital in Germany 3 days later and realized who had flown him out. There is still the small wooden lure in her thigh pocket. There is still the injury that does not appear in any official record. There is still Sergeant Major Krzyzewski standing on the flight line at Hunter in the rain on the 14th of November, holding a piece of paper. There is still, at the end of all of it, the 4 words. Stay with me. The flight home runs 78 minutes. I am going to give you all of them. Pour another one. She climbed out of the wadi at 50 knots and 50 feet AGL, which was the highest she dared go in the first minute, because she was still in territory that might contain the lone shooter from the ridge, and because the aircraft, at 7.5 over gross, was responding sluggishly to every input, and because she wanted to feel out exactly how much aircraft she had before she committed to a cruise profile. She had less aircraft than she was used to. She told the flight surgeon at Hunter later, and the flight surgeon told me, that the AH-6 in that configuration felt, to her, like a different helicopter than the one she had been flying for 8 years. She said the cyclic was heavy. She said the collective wanted more pitch than the gauges said it needed. She said the tail rotor pedals were taking more force than usual to hold heading, which meant the engine was working harder than normal to maintain rotor RPM, which meant fuel burn was going to be worse than her already pessimistic estimate. She revised the egress math in her head about 90 seconds into the climb, and the number she came up with was worse than the number she had given Marcus Renner on the radio. The number she had given Renner was based on book fuel burn at cruise. The number she now had in front of her was based on the actual fuel burn she could see on the totalizer, which was running approximately 22% over book. 22% over book on 13 gallons. Over 80 kilometers at the speed the overloaded aircraft would safely cruise, which she had now established was about 90 knots, not the 120 she would normally pull on an egress, gave her a landing fuel state of, by her own mental arithmetic at the time, somewhere between 0 and 1%. 0 meant the engine flamed out before she got there. 1% meant she landed with about 3/4 of a gallon in the tank, which is less fuel than most cars have in them when the low fuel light comes on. There was no third option that involved getting home with a comfortable reserve. That option had stopped existing when she put the skids on the ground in the wadi. She had known it would stop existing. She had landed anyway. So now the question was not whether the fuel was tight. The fuel was past tight. The fuel was a problem she was going to solve by getting the aircraft on the ground at Green Village before the engine quit, or by not getting the aircraft on the ground at Green Village before the engine quit. Those were the 2 outcomes. Everything she did for the next 76 minutes was going to be in service of the first outcome. She did 3 things in the next 90 seconds. The first thing she did was bring the aircraft down to 30 feet AGL and hold it there. Lower altitude meant denser air, meant more lift per unit of collective pitch, meant less power required, meant less fuel burned. 30 feet AGL over unfamiliar terrain at night, with 7 men on the skids, is not something a sane pilot does for fun. She did it anyway, because the math required it. The second thing she did was lean the mixture, which on a turbine engine means adjusting the fuel control to run slightly fuel lean of the manufacturer's recommended setting. This costs you about 2% of available power and gives you back about 4% of fuel economy. At 7.5 over gross with 13 gallons in the tank, 4% of fuel economy was worth more than 2% of available power. She made the trade. The third thing she did was key the radio one time and say to Renner, in the same conversational voice as before, Green Village, Lima 6. Revise estimate. Touchdown 0338. Maybe 0340. Fuel will be on fumes. Keep the foam trucks rolling. Renner said, Lima 6, Green Village. Roger. Foam is staged. Medics are staged. Surgical team is in the bay. We are ready for you. Akana said, copy. She did not say thank you. She did not. On any recording I have access to from any point in this entire mission, say thank you to anyone. She said copy. She said Roger. She said coming home. The crew chief at Hunter who serviced her aircraft told me, in a separate conversation, that she had said thank you to him exactly once in 3 years of working on her bird, on a morning in March of 2017 when he had stayed late to finish a phase inspection so she could fly a training sortie the next morning. He said she came into the hangar at 0600, looked at the aircraft, looked at him, and said, thank you for the night, Sergeant. Then she pre-flight and flew. He said it was the only time. He said he remembered it because it was the only time. Some people, he said, save their gratitude. Some people, he said, save it the way other people save money. You only spend it when something is worth it. Renner, on the radio that night, got copy. The crew chief, on a March morning when he had given her an extra 8 hours of his own life to keep her aircraft in the air, got thank you for the night. I am telling you this because the next thing that happened on the egress was the kind of moment that, for most pilots, would have produced a thank you on the radio, and for Lani Akana, did not. The moment was this. At approximately 0238, 24 minutes into the egress, Renner came up on the radio with an unprompted call. He said, Lima 6, Green Village. Be advised, we have a tanker airborne out of Al-Assad. Refueling capable C-130. He is offering to meet you en route and give you a top-off. This was not, by any normal definition, a legal or sane offer. An AH-6 Little Bird is not a refueling-capable aircraft in the sense of being able to take on fuel from a tanker in flight. The Little Bird has a single fuel filler port on the upper left of the fuselage. You fuel it on the ground, from a truck, with a nozzle. There is no in-flight refueling capability. What Renner was offering, in the language of the moment, was this. The C-130 would fly to a predetermined point along Akana's route, land on a stretch of road or hard-packed desert that had been previously surveyed and was in CENTCOM's database as a suitable austere landing strip, and offload fuel from its own tanks into hers through a ground transfer. This is a thing the special operations community has done before, in extremis. It is not a thing anybody does for fun. The C-130 is itself flying into unfamiliar terrain at night, in a contested area, to land on a strip that may or may not be defended, to give fuel to an aircraft that may or may not make the rendezvous, in order to save lives that may or may not be savable. Somebody, somewhere, and to this day I do not know who, though I have my guesses, had heard Akana's radio calls and had picked up a phone and had gotten a C-130 in the air out of Al Assad Air Base in western Iraq, which is approximately 400 kilometers from where she was flying, and had pointed it at her. The C-130 had been in the air for, by the time Renner relayed the offer, about 18 minutes. It was going to take another 40 minutes to reach the rendezvous point Renner was proposing. Akana would, by that point in her flight, have either landed at Green Village or run out of fuel and gone down. She did the math. It took her about 4 seconds. She keyed the radio. She said, "Green Village, Lima 6. Negative on the tanker. Tell him thank you and tell him to go home. I will not make the rendezvous. I am going to Green Village." "Out," Renner said. "Roger, Lima 6. A different voice came on the radio. A voice I do not have identified by name in any of my materials, but a voice that the after-action review describes as the C-130 aircraft commander, who had been monitoring the tactical frequency. The voice said, "Lima 6, this is the tanker. I can be at your 8-1 Bravo in 38 minutes. I have 8,000 pounds for you. Confirm you do not want the gas." Akana keyed the radio. She said, "Tanker, Lima 6. I have 7 souls on the skids. One is unconscious with a broken femur. I have 11% fuel and falling. I am 90 knots at 30 feet AGL. I cannot wait 38 minutes. I will not make your strip. Get your aircraft on the ground somewhere safe. I am going to Green Village. Thank you for coming up." Out. That was it. That was the thank you. She said it once, to a man whose name she did not know, who had launched into a war zone at 2 in the morning on the chance that he might be able to give her gas she could not actually receive, and she told him to go home, and she thanked him, and she went back to the work of keeping her aircraft in the air. The C-130 turned around at approximately 0243 local and was back on the ground at Al Assad by 0410. I do not know the name of the aircraft commander. I have tried to find out. The Air Force, when I asked, told me they could not confirm the mission had ever taken place, which is the Air Force's way of telling you that the mission had taken place and that they were not going to talk about it. I want to tell that man, if he is watching this, that I know what he did. I know he scrambled. I know he flew towards something he was not going to be able to help with, because there was a chance, however small, that he might be able to help with it, and because night stalkers do not get left in the desert if there is anything anybody anywhere can do about it. I know he went home empty. I want him to know that the woman he was trying to help made it. She made it on the fuel she had, by the flying she did, alone, without his gas, and she made it because she was that good. But she would not have been able to make it if she had not known, in the back of her mind for the last 55 minutes of the flight, that somebody had tried, that the radio had spoken up and offered her something. I think it mattered. I think she would not say so, but I think it mattered. That is the kind of community the 160th and the Special Operations Air community generally is. People you have never met scramble for you in the middle of the night and do not get credit and do not ask for it. I wanted to put that on the record. Now back to the cockpit. She had 55 minutes of flying left. She still had a problem she had not solved yet. The problem she had not solved yet was the asymmetric load on the skids. She had figured it out in the first 5 minutes of the climb, but she had filed it away in the back of her head because there was nothing to do about it immediately and because the fuel problem was more urgent. Now, 25 minutes into the egress, with the tanker turned around and the math holding at 1% on landing if nothing else went wrong, the asymmetric load was the next problem in the queue. Here is the geometry. On the right skid, Bishop, 210 pounds, plus his combat load, which on that night was approximately 65 pounds of plates, weapons, ammunition, water, and gear, for a total of about 275 pounds. Plus 2 other SEALs, similarly equipped, totaling approximately 540 pounds. Right skid total, roughly 815 pounds. On the left skid, the crew chief, approximately 180 pounds plus a survival vest, total maybe 200. Plus 3 SEALs, totaling roughly 810 pounds. Left skid total, roughly 1,010 pounds. The left skid was approximately 195 pounds heavier than the right skid. On a little bird, the skids are about 6 feet apart. 195 pounds of differential, applied at that lever arm, creates a constant roll moment to the left that the pilot has to compensate for by holding right cyclic. Holding right cyclic for 78 minutes is not difficult in itself. The cyclic on a little bird is light. You can hold an offset all day if you have to. The problem is what it does to the rest of the flight envelope. Holding right cyclic to counter a left roll moment means the rotor disc is tilted slightly to the right relative to the fuselage, which means a small component of the rotor's lift is being used to counter the roll instead of holding the aircraft up, which means more collective pitch is required to maintain altitude, which means more power, which means more fuel. She had estimated, in the back of her head, that the asymmetric load was costing her about 3% of fuel economy. 3% of 13 gallons is about half a gallon. Half a gallon, at the cruise burn rate she was now seeing, was about 2.5 minutes of flight. 2.5 minutes, at 90 knots, was about 3.5 nautical miles. Green Village was, at that moment, approximately 42 nautical miles away. She did not have 3.5 nautical miles to give. The problem she had not solved yet was, how do you redistribute the load on the skids of a helicopter in flight at 30 feet AGL, at 90 knots over hostile terrain at 2:40 in the morning with one of your passengers unconscious and another with a piece of rotor blade in his calf and the radio off so nobody can second-guess you? The answer she came up with was, you do not redistribute the load. You change the aircraft's attitude to compensate. What she did, at approximately 0242, was she introduced a very slight, very deliberate slip into her flight path. She nudged the pedals to yaw the nose about 2 degrees to the right of the flight track, and she held left cyclic to counter the resulting roll, and she let the airframe fly slightly sideways through the air. This is called a side slip, and most pilots use it to bleed off altitude on approach or to compensate for crosswinds on landing. They do not normally use it as a cruise configuration on a 78-minute egress. What the side slip did, in her case, was it changed the geometry of the rotor disc relative to the relative wind in a way that offloaded some of the right cyclic compensation she had been holding. The aircraft was still flying out of trim. It was still burning more fuel than a clean, balanced aircraft would have burned. But it was burning less fuel than it had been burning 30 seconds earlier. She estimated, later, that the sideslip recovered about half of the fuel penalty from the asymmetric load. Maybe 1.5%. Maybe 1/4 of a gallon. 1/4 of a gallon at her burn rate was about 1 minute and 15 seconds of flight. 1 minute and 15 seconds at 90 knots was about 1.75 miles. She was now 1.75 miles less short than she had been before she figured out the side slip. She held the side slip for the next 46 minutes. Holding a deliberate side slip in cruise for 46 minutes is, to be clear, not something they teach. It is not in the flight manual. It is not in the standardization manual. It is not a maneuver. It is a thing one pilot, alone in a cockpit, working a problem in her head, invented on the spot, because the situation required an invention and there was no one to call to ask permission and no time to call them if there had been. The crew chief on the left skid noticed it about 90 seconds in. He told me later that he could feel the airframe flying slightly crooked through the air, and he could see, through his NVGs, that the nose was not pointed where the aircraft was going. He said he understood immediately what she was doing, and he said the understanding was the moment in the flight when he stopped being scared. He said, I had been scared from the moment we lifted out of the wadi. I had been scared because I knew the math and I knew we were not going to make it on the math. And then about 90 seconds after she rolled the nose off, I felt the aircraft change, and I looked at the panel through the cockpit door, and I could see her hands on the controls, and I realized she had just bought us a mile. Maybe two. I didn't know exactly, but I knew she had bought us something. And I thought, she is still finding things. She has not stopped looking. And that was the moment I stopped being scared. Because if she was still finding things at 26 minutes into the flight with 11% fuel, she was going to keep finding things, and she was going to find enough things, and we were going to make it. He paused. He said, I have flown with a lot of pilots, Mr. Hatch. I have flown with some of the best pilots in the United States Army. I have never flown with anyone who could keep finding things the way she could. Most pilots, when they get to the edge of what the aircraft will do, they stop. They fly the edge. She didn't fly the edge. She kept moving the edge. Every 2 minutes, she would do some little thing, adjust the mixture again, drop another 10 feet of altitude, change the angle of bank in her gentle turns, anything. And the aircraft would give her back another fraction of a percent of fuel. And she kept doing it. For 78 minutes. She just kept doing it. I asked him, did she say anything during the flight? He said, no. I asked him, nothing at all. He said, one thing. At about the 45-minute mark, she keyed the intercom. There is an intercom that goes to the crew chief position even when he's on the skid, through a hardwire, and she said to me, very quietly, Sergeant, tell 6 to hold on for 30 more minutes. And then she went off the intercom, and I leaned in through the door and I yelled at McCready, who was still unconscious, Sir, 30 more minutes, sir. You hold on. Even though he could not hear me, because she had told me to tell him, and so I told him. And that was it. That was the only thing she said for 78 minutes. Tell 6 to hold on for 30 more minutes. She knew McCready could not hear her. She knew the crew chief was going to deliver the message anyway. She wanted the message delivered. I do not know what that says about her. I have thought about it for a long time. The most charitable reading is that she understood, in the middle of the work, that the man she had every right to despise was dying on the cargo platform behind her seat, and that she did not want him to die without somebody having spoken to him by name during the flight that was supposed to save him. The least charitable reading is that she was talking to a future McCready, the one who was going to wake up in Germany 3 days later, and she was making sure that when he woke up, the crew chief would tell him, she had me tell you to hold on, and that McCready would have to live with that for the rest of his life. I think both readings are true. I think Lani Akana was the kind of pilot and the kind of person who could do something for 2 reasons at once and not feel any contradiction between them. I think the message was real and the message was also a debt being entered into a ledger, and both of those things were Lani Akana being Lani Akana, and neither of them cancels the other out. She flew on. The aircraft flew on. The fuel kept going down. At approximately 0328, with 10 minutes to Green Village and the fuel totalizer reading 3%, and the aircraft still flying at 30 feet AGL with a 2-degree sideslip and 7 men on the skids and 1 unconscious on the cargo platform, the thing happened that almost killed them. The thing that happened was a flock of birds. I am not making this up. A flock of starlings, somewhere between 40 and 60 individual birds, roosting in a low scrub area along the Euphrates River about 9 kilometers north of Green Village, was disturbed by the sound of the helicopter approaching at 30 feet AGL and lifted off the ground en masse approximately 2 seconds before the aircraft passed over their roost. Akana saw them coming up through her NVGs at a range of about 40 meters. She had 2 options. Option 1, pull up, climb over them. Cost: a significant collective pull, which at 3% fuel and 7.5 over gross, meant a significant fuel penalty, and possibly, if the climb was aggressive enough, a momentary droop in rotor RPM that the engine, running lean and stressed, might not recover from cleanly. Option 2. Fly through them. Cost: bird strike. On a little bird, the windscreen is acrylic and the rotor is a 5-blade composite system that has been known to disintegrate when struck by a large bird at speed. The engine intake is on the upper rear of the fuselage and is screened, but a bird ingestion at that engine load could cause a flameout. She had about 1 second to decide. She chose option 3, which she invented in that 1 second. Option 3 was bank hard right, dive 5 feet, and slide the aircraft under the rising flock. The birds, lifting off, were climbing through approximately 15 to 20 feet of altitude in the moment of decision. She was at 30. If she could get the aircraft down to 25 and bank right enough to fly through the gap that was opening on the right side of the flock as the birds rose more or less straight up, she could thread between them. She banked. She dove. She slid through. 3 birds hit the aircraft. One hit the right windscreen and left a smear of feathers and blood across her field of view, but did not penetrate. One hit the leading edge of the right skid platform and shattered, spraying tissue across Bishop, who was clipped onto that skid. One was ingested into the engine intake. The engine made a sound. The sound, the crew chief told me, was a sound he had never heard a turbine engine make before. He described it as a kind of cough, like an old man clearing his throat, except it was an engine, and engines don't cough. He said the sound lasted about 1.5 seconds. He said during that 1.5 seconds, he was certain the aircraft was going down. The engine recovered. The TOD, turbine outlet temperature, spiked into the red and held there for approximately 4 seconds, then came back into the green as whatever was left of the bird worked its way through the hot section and out the exhaust. The rotor RPM dropped by about 3% during the cough, and then came back up. The aircraft, which had been in a hard right bank at 25 feet AGL, was now in a hard right bank at 16 feet AGL, because the rotor droop had cost her about 9 feet of altitude in the 1.5 seconds of reduced lift. She was, by the crew chief's estimate, somewhere between 8 and 10 feet from the ground when the engine came back. She rolled out of the bank. She climbed back to 30 feet. She held heading. She keyed the intercom. She said to the crew chief, in the same quiet voice as before, "Sergeant, bird strike. We are okay. Tell Bishop I am sorry about his face." Then she went back off the intercom. Bishop, on the right skid, was at that moment using his free hand, the one not holding the platform, to wipe bird tissue off his NVGs. He had not been hurt. He told me later that he heard the cough of the engine and felt the aircraft drop, and that he had a very clear thought, which was, "I have survived a crash and a side-slip exfil and a tanker offer, and I am going to be killed by a bird." And then the engine came back, and the aircraft leveled, and the crew chief leaned over from the other skid and yelled across the open cockpit, into the wind, "She says she's sorry about your face." Bishop laughed. He told me he laughed for about 10 seconds, hanging from the skid of a helicopter at 30 feet AGL over the Syrian desert with bird tissue on his goggles and a piece of rotor blade still in his calf, and the only working aircraft for 100 kilometers being flown by a woman who had just apologized to him for a bird strike she had threaded a flock to avoid. He said, "Hatch, I have not laughed like that before or since." It was the laugh of a man who has accepted that he is going to live. I did not know I was going to live until I laughed. The laugh told me. The laugh and the apology. Because if she had the spare brain cells to apologize to me for a bird, she had the spare brain cells to land the aircraft. And if she could land the aircraft, I was going home. He paused. He said, I think about the apology a lot. Tell Bishop I am sorry about his face. It is the most pilot thing anyone has ever said to me. She was not sorry about the bird. She was not sorry about the dive. She was not sorry about anything she had done. She was sorry that a consequence of her doing the right thing had landed on me. That was the apology. It was very precise. She apologized for exactly the thing that needed apologizing for and nothing else. I want you to hold that next to the briefing room. In the briefing room, in August of 2015, McCready had said something he did not need to say in front of 7 people, and he had not apologized for it for 2 years and 3 months, and when he finally did, it was not in words. In the cockpit, in November of 2017, at 0328, with 3% fuel and an engine that had just coughed and a flock of starlings receding behind her, Akana had thrown bird tissue on a SEAL commander's face in the course of saving his life, and she had apologized for it in 11 words on the intercom within 4 seconds of the event. That is the difference between the two pilots. That is, if I had to put it in one sentence, the difference between the woman and the man. She apologized for what she did. He did not apologize for what he said. And both of them, at the moment of the apology and the absence of the apology, were operating at the absolute edge of what their job allowed them to be. There is a thing my father, who was a Marine, used to say, which is that character is what you do when you are tired. Lani Akana was tired. She had been awake for 20 hours. She had been flying combat for 2.5 hours. She had been at the edge of an aircraft's envelope for over an hour. She had 3% fuel and a coughing engine and 7 men hanging from her skids. And she had the spare character, in those conditions, to apologize on the intercom for a bird. That is who she was. That is who she is. She flew on. 6 minutes to Green Village. The lights of FOB Green Village came into her NVG field of view at approximately 0333 local, at a range of about 4 kilometers. She keyed the radio. She said, Green Village, Lima 6. Visual on the field. Inbound. 2% fuel. Coming straight in. Renner said, Lima 6, Green Village. We have you visual. You are cleared to land any pad. Wind calm. Foam is rolling. Medic standing by. Bring it home, Chief. She said, copy. She did not say coming home this time. She had said it earlier in the flight. She had used the phrase once, and she was not going to use it again. That was not Lani Akana being sentimental. That was Lani Akana being efficient with words the way she was efficient with fuel. She brought the aircraft over the perimeter wire of Green Village at 0336. She brought it over the apron at 0337. She set the skids down on the medevac pad at 0337 and 41 seconds. The fuel totalizer, when the skids touched, read 1%. The flight engineer who fueled her aircraft the next morning told me he drained the tank to measure what was left in it, because he wanted to know, and because everyone on the FOB wanted to know. What was left in it was 1.1 gallons. 1.1 gallons. At her cruise burn rate of about 2.5 gallons per minute, that was 26 seconds of flight. She had landed with 26 seconds of fuel. I am going to let that sit for a moment. She had landed with 26 seconds of fuel, with 7 men on the skids of an aircraft rated for 2 passengers, after a 78-minute egress at 30 feet AGL with a 2-degree side slip and a bird strike and a coughing engine, from a contested LZ next to a burning helicopter, in support of an exfil whose lead aircraft was down and whose lead pilot was unconscious on her cargo platform, with a femur broken by the crew chief who had pulled him out of the fire. And the first thing she did, after the skids touched, before the rotor had even spun down, was she keyed the intercom and said to the crew chief, Sergeant, get them off. Get 6 to the medics. I am going to sit here for a minute. That is on the cockpit voice recorder. The crew chief got off the left skid. The SEALs got off both skids. The medics, who had been waiting at the edge of the pad, ran in under the still spinning rotor, which is something you are not supposed to do, ever, on a little bird, because the rotor disc on a little bird is low and has killed more than one person who ran in under it. And they took McCready off the cargo platform on a litter and ran him to the surgical bay. Bishop, on the right skid, did not get off immediately. He waited until everyone else was clear. Then he hopped down on his one good leg, walked around to the right side of the cockpit on a leg that should not have been walking on at all, opened the cockpit door, and looked in at Akana. She was still in her seat. She had not moved. Her hands were still on the controls. The rotor was still turning. Bishop told me what he saw. He said, she was crying, not making a sound, not shaking, just water coming out of her eyes and running down her face under the NVGs. And she was looking straight ahead, out the windscreen, at the empty pad. And her hands were still on the cyclic and the collective like she was still flying, like she had not noticed she was on the ground. He said, I did not say anything. I just stood there. I think I stood there for maybe a minute. And then she turned her head and she looked at me, and the NVGs were still down over her face, so I could not see her eyes, just the lower half of her face with the water on it. And she said to me, Bishop, is everyone off? And I said, everyone's off, Chief. Everyone is off and 6 is moving to surgery. And she nodded once and she said, thank you. And then she turned her head back to the windscreen and she went back to looking at the empty pad. He said, thank you. That was the second time I ever heard her say it. The first was to the tanker pilot. The second was to me. And I was not the one who deserved it. I had done nothing. She had done everything. But she said thank you to me, because I had told her everyone was off. I had given her the one piece of information she needed, which was that the 7 souls she had been carrying for 78 minutes were no longer her responsibility. And the moment they were no longer her responsibility, she could let go. And the letting go was the crying. And the thank you was for telling her she could let go. He paused for a long time. He said, I have thought about this for 5 years, Mr. Hatch. I have decided that what I saw in that cockpit was a person finishing a job, not finishing it physically, because the rotor was still turning and her hands were still on the controls. Finishing it in the part of her that mattered. She had carried 7 men through a thing none of them should have survived, and she had done it without ever once acknowledging, to herself or to anyone, that it was hard. And the moment I told her everyone was off, she let herself acknowledge it, for about a minute, and then she put it away. He said, I do not know what she did with it after she put it away. I think she carries it. I think she carried it then, and I think she carries it now. I think every pilot at her level carries every flight they ever took at that level, in some part of themselves, forever. I think that is the price. I think she knew the price when she got in the aircraft. I think she paid it. I think she is still paying it. I think she will pay it until she dies. He said, I am grateful to her every day. I do not call her. I do not write. I sent her a Christmas card in 2018, and she did not send one back. I do not hold that against her. I think she has her ledger, and I am in it, and that is enough for her. I am in it on the asset side, and so is the crew chief, and so are my men, and so is McCready, and so are some other people. And I think the ledger is, for her, what the flying is. It is the thing she keeps. It is the thing that keeps her. He stopped. He said, I am going to stop talking now. I think I have told you everything I know. That was the end of my conversation with Eric Vandermeer in 2022. He died in 2024 of a cancer he had been fighting quietly for 3 years and had not told me about during our conversation. I learned about it from his obituary. I went to his funeral in North Carolina. There were maybe 60 people there. I did not see Lani Akana. I do not know if she was told. I do not know if she would have come if she had been told. I have my guesses. I am going to keep them to myself. The rotor on her aircraft wound down at 0341 local. She sat in the cockpit until it stopped. Then she unstrapped, removed her helmet, set it on the right seat, climbed out of the aircraft, walked across the pad to the operations building, walked into the small office that had been assigned to the visiting flight element, sat down at the desk, took the small green notebook out of her thigh pocket, and wrote one line. The line, dated November 3rd, 17-0347L. 7 home. 1 critical. Aircraft on the ground. Fuel 1.1 gallons. Lesson: the aircraft will give you everything it has if you ask it correctly. Do not ask it incorrectly. Do less. That was the entry. She closed the notebook. She put it in her pocket. She walked to the surgical bay to check on McCready. That is where the next part of the story begins. The surgical bay at FOB Green Village in November of 2017 was a modular structure, the kind the Army calls a temper tent, with hard flooring and a HEPA filter and 4 operating tables and a refrigerated blood storage unit in the corner. On a normal night, it was staffed by a forward surgical team of 2 surgeons, an anesthetist, 3 nurses, and a medic. On the night of November 2nd into November 3rd, it was staffed by all of those people plus a neurosurgeon who had been flown in from Baghdad 11 hours earlier on the chance that he might be needed for one of the SEALs, and who had spent the intervening time playing cards with the anesthetist and drinking instant coffee. The neurosurgeon was the one who took McCready when the medics rolled him in. The femur was the easy part. The femur was a clean midshaft fracture, no displacement of consequence, no vascular involvement, and the orthopedist on the team, who was not the neurosurgeon, but who happened to also be on the FOB that night for unrelated reasons, could set it and stabilize it in about 40 minutes. The hard part was the head. McCready had taken a piece of the cockpit door against his left temple in the crash sequence. The crew chief, when he pulled him out, had not noticed it because there was no external bleeding to speak of, and because the helmet had largely absorbed the impact, and because the femur was the obvious injury. The crew chief had triaged the obvious injury and loaded the man on the platform. The neurosurgeon, 20 minutes after McCready arrived at Green Village, had a CT image on his screen that showed a subdural hematoma about 6 millimeters thick over the left temporal lobe, with mass effect, with midline shift, with the kind of trajectory that, untreated for another 2 hours, would have killed him. He told me, when I interviewed him in 2021, that the timing had been the kind of timing that makes religious people religious and makes the rest of us superstitious. He said, if she had landed 10 minutes later, he would have died. Not on the table, in the air. The pressure would have crossed a threshold and the brainstem would have herniated and he would have died on her cargo platform without her knowing he was dying. She would have landed with a dead man on the back of the aircraft. He said, I do not know if anyone has ever told her that. I never told her. I do not know who I would have told. I am telling you because you are writing this down, and I think it should be written down. I am writing it down. 10 minutes. That was the margin. The tanker she turned down would have cost her more than 10 minutes. The bird strike, if she had climbed instead of dove, would have cost her, by the neurosurgeon's later estimate based on the engine data, somewhere between 4 and 7 minutes of additional flight time due to fuel penalty and possible engine recovery delay. The side slip she invented at 0242, which had recovered approximately 1 minute and 15 seconds of flight, was the difference between McCready living and McCready dying. I will say that one more time, because I want to be sure you have heard it. The side slip she invented at 0242, alone in the cockpit, with the radio off, with no one to ask, with no one to tell, with the asymmetric load problem in her head, and 1/4 gallon of fuel at stake, was the difference between Marcus McCready living and Marcus McCready dying. She did not know it at the time. She does not know it now, as far as I am aware. I have never told her. The neurosurgeon never told her. The crew chief did not know the medical details, and so could not have told her. McCready himself, when he woke up in Germany 3 days later, was told only that he had been very close to dying and that he was very lucky to be alive. And McCready, being who he was, did not ask for the specific math. But I have the math. I have it from the neurosurgeon, and I have it from the engine data, and I have it from the fuel data, and I have done the arithmetic 3 different ways, and the arithmetic comes out the same every time. The man who had said the thing in the briefing room in August of 2015 was alive in February of 2018 to send her his Master Aviator wings because of a sideslip she invented in her head on a quarter tank of fuel over the Syrian desert at 2:42 in the morning on the 3rd of November of 2017. She had carried him on the cargo platform behind her seat for 78 minutes. She had told the crew chief to tell him to hold on for 30 more minutes. She had landed with 26 seconds of fuel, and the sideslip had bought him the minute and 15 seconds without which none of the rest of it would have mattered. I want you to hold that against the ledger, too. She did not know she was saving his life when she did it. She thought she was saving her own life and the lives of 6 SEALs and a crew chief. She did the sideslip for the fuel. She did not do it for him, but it saved him anyway. That is a kind of grace I do not have a word for. The thing you did for one reason, that turned out to do a different thing you did not know it was doing, and the different thing was the thing that mattered most. I think every life has a few moments like that in it. Most of us never learn which moments they were. Lani Akana will probably never learn which moment hers was. I am telling you because I think somebody should know. And somebody should write it down, and the somebody is me, and the writing it down is this. She walked into the surgical bay at approximately 03:52, 11 minutes after the rotor on her aircraft stopped turning. She was still in her flight suit. She had taken off her survival vest and her helmet and her gloves and her chicken plate, but she had not changed clothes. There was bird tissue on her right sleeve. There was sand in her hair. There was a smear of someone else's blood. She did not know whose. Across the front of her flight suit at about chest level, from where one of the SEALs had braced against her shoulder when she hauled him onto the skid. She walked into the surgical bay, and she stood just inside the door, and she watched. There were 4 tables in use. McCready was on the table farthest from the door. There were 6 people around him. She could see the neurosurgeon working on the side of his head. She could see the orthopedist working on his leg. She could see in 4 lines, 2 4 lines, 3 4 lines. She could see the monitor. She could see his chest rising and falling under the drape. She watched 4, by the count of the senior nurse who was running the bay that night and who noticed her standing there, approximately 90 seconds. The senior nurse, whose name was Captain Reyes, came over to her. Reyes told me, when I interviewed her in 2020, I came over to her because I thought she was a casualty. She was standing in the doorway with blood on her flight suit, and she was not moving, and she had the look on her face that casualties get when they have walked in under their own power and they are about to fall over. I came over to triage her. Reyes said. I got close to her, and I said, "Ma'am, are you hurt?" And she looked at me, and she said, "No, I am the pilot." And I said, "The pilot of what?" Because I did not know yet that the little bird had come in. And she said, "Lima 6. I brought him in." And she pointed at McCready on the far table. Reyes said, I looked at her. I looked at the table. I looked back at her. I said, "Ma'am, do you want to sit down?" And she said, "No, thank you, Captain. I want to stand here for a minute. Is he going to make it?" And I said, "I do not know yet. The neurosurgeon is working. It is a head injury. We will know more in an hour." And she nodded, and she did not say anything else, and she stood there for, I think, another 4 or 5 minutes. And then she turned around and she walked out. Reyes said, "She did not say thank you." She did not say goodbye. She did not ask me to call her when we knew. She just walked out. I asked Reyes if she had thought that was strange. Reyes said, at the time, yes. Later, no. Later, I understood that she was not going to ask me to call her, because asking would have been a claim on the man, and she was not in the business of making claims on him. She had brought him in. That was her job. What happened to him after he was on my table was my job. She was clear about that. She was clear about it in a way that, frankly, most pilots are not. Most pilots want to know. They want updates. They want to be in the loop. She did not want to be in the loop. She wanted to be done. Reyes said, I think she was the most professional person I ever met. I have been doing this work for 19 years, and I have met a lot of people. She was the most professional. I do not mean she was the best at her job, although I have no doubt she was. I mean she had the cleanest understanding of where her job ended and someone else's began. She had brought him in. The bringing in was over. She left. I asked Reyes if she had ever seen Akana again. Reyes said no. I went off rotation 2 weeks later, and I came home, and I never went back to Green Village. I heard about her after the fact. I heard about the flight. I put it together in my head that the woman in my doorway was the woman who had flown the egress that everybody on the FOB was talking about for the next month. I thought about writing her a letter. I did not write the letter. I thought she would not want a letter. I think I was right about that, although I am not sure. I think about her about once a year. I am glad you are writing this. I am glad somebody is. I am writing this. I am writing this, in part, for Captain Reyes, who is now Major Reyes, and who is still doing this work, and who deserved to know that her 30 seconds with Lani Akana in the doorway of a surgical bay in Syria in November of 2017 mattered enough to be in a story somebody was going to read. Akana walked out of the surgical bay at approximately 03:58. She walked back across the apron to her aircraft. The aircraft was still on the medevac pad. The maintenance crew had not yet pushed it back to the parking area. The flight engineer who would later drain the tank was standing next to it with a flashlight, doing a walk-around. He saw her coming. He stopped what he was doing. He told me later, I had heard the radio calls. The whole FOB had heard the radio calls. I knew she had brought it in on fumes. I knew she had 7 souls on the skids. I was looking at the aircraft, and I was trying to understand what I was looking at. The skids were splayed. The skids were splayed from the weight. They were not bent past spec. I checked, but they were splayed about 1.5 inches wider than they should have been. The rotor blades had bird residue on 2 of them, and there was a piece of acrylic missing from the right windscreen about the size of a quarter. The aircraft looked like it had been through a war. And then she walked up to it, and she put her hand on the door frame, and she stood there for about 10 seconds, and then she patted the airframe twice, like you would pat a horse, and she said, very quietly, "Thank you," and she walked away. 3 times in her career, by the count of the people who were close to her work and who were willing to tell me, Lani Akana said thank you. She said it to the crew chief at Hunter on a March morning in 2017. She said it to a C-130 aircraft commander whose name she did not know on a radio frequency over the Syrian desert in November of 2017. She said it to her aircraft, with her hand on the door frame, at 03:59 on the morning of November 3rd, 2017, after the aircraft had given her everything it had and she had asked it correctly. She did not say it to Bishop. She did not say it to Reyes. She did not say it to Renner. She did not say it to the neurosurgeon. She did not say it, as far as I am aware, to McCready, ever. She said it to the aircraft. I think about that a lot. I think Lani Akana understood something about the relationship between a pilot and a machine that most of us do not understand and that most of us are not built to understand. I think she understood that the aircraft had done a thing for her that no human being had done for her, which was that the aircraft had not asked her to be anything other than what she was. The aircraft did not care that she was a woman, or that she was Hawaiian, or that she had been the second best pilot in her class at flight school, or that she had been told no in a briefing room in 2015 in a way she should not have been told no. The aircraft cared about whether she asked it correctly. She asked it correctly. It gave her everything it had. I think the thank you was for that. I think it was the cleanest thank you of her life, because it was the one that was owed to the entity that had asked the least of her and given the most. I am not going to belabor the point. I am going to move on. She slept for 4 hours in the visiting officer's quarters at Green Village. She was woken at 0800 by Renner, who came in person to tell her that McCready was out of surgery, that the hematoma had been evacuated, that the prognosis was guardedly good, and that an Air Force C-17 was inbound to take the casualties to Landstuhl in Germany. She thanked Renner. 4. The fourth thank you I know about. She asked if she could ride with the casualties. Renner said yes. She packed her gear in 11 minutes. She was on the C-17 at 0947. She did not fly the aircraft she had brought in. The aircraft stayed at Green Village, was inspected, was found to require a depot-level overhaul, was eventually returned to Hunter Army Airfield 2 months later on a different C-17, and was flown again by other pilots until it was retired from the inventory in 2021. I have a photograph of it on my desk. The flight engineer who drained the tank took the photograph the morning after the flight. He sent it to me in 2022 when I asked. In the photograph, the aircraft looks tired. I do not know how else to describe it. It looks like an aircraft that has done a thing. She sat in the cargo bay of the C-17 for the entire 8-hour flight to Germany. She did not sleep. She sat on the jump seat nearest to McCready's litter. She did not touch him. She did not speak to him. He was sedated and intubated and on a ventilator and could not have heard her if she had. She just sat there. The flight medic on the C-17 told me later that he had tried, twice, to offer her a sandwich, and that she had refused both times, politely, and that on the third offer, about 6 hours in, she had accepted the sandwich, eaten 3 bites of it, set it down on the seat next to her, and not picked it up again. He said, she was on watch. That is the only way I can describe it. She had brought him out of the desert, and she was not going to stop watching him until somebody else was watching him. I have seen this before with mothers and very sick children. I have not seen it before with pilots and passengers. I do not think I will see it again. The C-17 landed at Ramstein at approximately 1700 local European time on November 3rd. McCready was offloaded to an ambulance. The ambulance took him to Landstuhl Regional Medical Center. Akana followed in a separate vehicle. She stayed in the waiting area of the ICU at Landstuhl for the next 71 hours. She did not go to the lodging that had been arranged for her on the base. She did not change out of her flight suit for the first 36 of those hours. She drank coffee. She ate sandwiches when nurses brought them to her. She slept in the chair in 20-minute increments, sitting up with her boots on. She did not, by the account of the ICU charge nurse, speak to anyone except to answer direct questions and to ask, every 6 hours, for an update on the patient's condition. The patient's condition, over the 71 hours, improved. At approximately 1600 local on November 6th, McCready was extubated. At approximately 1730 local on November 6th, he was alert enough to be told where he was. At approximately 1800 local on November 6th, the attending physician went into the ICU room, sat down next to the bed, and told Lieutenant Colonel Marcus McCready, USN, that he had been brought out of the field by a little bird flown by Chief Warrant Officer 3 Lani Akana, that the flight had been 78 minutes long at 30 feet AGL, with 7 passengers on the skids and 1 on the cargo platform, that the aircraft had landed with 26 seconds of fuel remaining, and that the pilot was sitting in the waiting room and had been there for nearly 3 days. McCready, by the account of the attending physician, did not say anything for approximately a full minute. Then he said, "Please ask her if she will come in." The attending physician went out to the waiting room. He found Akana in the corner chair, awake, with a styrofoam coffee cup in her hand, her flight suit by then 36 hours into its second wearing, her hair pulled back, her face composed. He said to her, "Chief Akana, the patient is awake. He has asked if you will come in." She looked at him. She said, "Did he ask for me by name?" The attending physician said, "Yes. He asked for you by name." She nodded. She said, "Tell him I will not be coming in." The attending physician said, "Ma'am?" She said, "Tell him I am glad he is awake. Tell him I am going home. Tell him the aircraft is at Green Village and will need a depot overhaul. Tell him the 7 souls on the skids are all accounted for and all recovering. Tell him I did my job. Tell him he does not owe me anything. Tell him I will see him at the next briefing he calls." Out. She stood up. She handed the attending physician her empty coffee cup. She walked out of the ICU waiting room at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center at approximately 18:06 local on the evening of November 6, 2017, and she did not see Marcus McCready again for 97 days. I want to stop here for a minute and talk about what was happening inside her body. I have not talked about it yet because she did not talk about it, and because the people around her did not know about it. And because by the conventions of how this kind of story usually gets told, the body of the pilot is supposed to be invisible. The pilot is supposed to be a mind in a cockpit. The pilot is not supposed to have a spine that hurts. The pilot is not supposed to have a neck that has been holding a 4-pound helmet at a 2-degree offset for 78 minutes while her right arm holds a cyclic at a constant pressure her musculature was not designed to hold for that long. The pilot is not supposed to have hands that are shaking when no one is looking 6 hours after the flight. But the pilot did have those things. I know she had those things because, in 2023, I obtained, through a Freedom of Information Act request that took 18 months to process, and that came back with most of the interesting paragraphs redacted, the partial medical records of 1 Chief Warrant Officer 3 Lani K. Akana, U.S. Army, covering the period November 2017 through March 2018. The records show that on November 22, 2017, 19 days after the flight, Akana presented to the flight surgeon at Hunter Army Airfield complaining of, and I am quoting, intermittent right arm numbness, persistent cervical pain, reduced grip strength in the right hand by approximately 15% compared to baseline, and headaches of new onset since November 3rd. The flight surgeon's notes indicate that he ordered an MRI of her cervical spine. The MRI showed a herniated disc at C6, C7 on the right side, with nerve root impingement. The flight surgeon's notes indicate that Akana told him, when he asked her how she thought the injury had occurred, that she did not know. The flight surgeon's notes indicate that he did not believe her. He wrote, in the assessment section of the encounter note, a sentence that I have read approximately 50 times and that I am going to read to you now. Point reports unknown etiology. Injury pattern most consistent with sustained asymmetric loading of cervical spine over prolonged period. C/W extended flight in unusual aircraft configuration. Point declined further questioning. Point requests no profile, no grounding, no notation in flight record. Point willing to accept conservative TX, PT, NSAIDs on personal time. Counseled point risk of progression without appropriate rest. Point acknowledged risk. Point requests we proceed as discussed. The flight surgeon did what she asked. He did not put her on a profile. He did not ground her. He did not notate it in her flight record. He gave her a prescription for ibuprofen and a referral to a physical therapist off base, whom she could see on her own time and pay for out of her own pocket without it going through the military medical system. He saw her again on December 11th, January 8th, February 5th, and March 12th. The notes from those visits indicate that the symptoms slowly improved over 4 months and were largely resolved by March, although the disc herniation itself was, of course, still visible on imaging and would be visible on imaging for the rest of her life. She flew the entire time. She flew training sorties. She flew administrative flights. She did not fly combat, because there was no combat to fly for her unit during that period, but she would have flown combat if there had been combat to fly. She flew with a herniated disc and intermittent numbness in her right arm and a 15% reduction in grip strength in her right hand, because she had asked the flight surgeon not to ground her, and the flight surgeon had agreed not to ground her. And the agreement was the kind of agreement that the special operations medical community sometimes makes with operators it respects, in violation of about 40 pages of Army regulations, because the alternative is to lose the operator. I am not endorsing what the flight surgeon did. I am not condemning it either. I am telling you what happened. I am telling you because it is part of the cost of the 78 minutes. And the cost of the 78 minutes is part of the story, and the story is not honest if it leaves the cost out. The cost was a piece of her cervical spine. The cost was 4 months of pain she did not tell anybody about. The cost was, by the assessment of an orthopedic surgeon I consulted in 2023 who looked at the imaging on a redacted basis, a probable lifetime of intermittent neck and arm symptoms that would flare under physical or emotional stress, and that would, over the course of her remaining flying career, require her to compensate in small, invisible ways for a hand that was not quite as strong as it had been. She paid the cost. She paid it in private. She did not invoice anyone for it. She did not, as far as I am aware, tell McCready about it. She did not tell Bishop about it. She did not tell Renner about it. She did not tell her Aunt Pua about it, although I suspect Pua knew, because Pua is the kind of person who knows things without being told. The flight surgeon told me about it in 2023 after I showed him the redacted records, and he confirmed that the redacted records were his. He told me on the understanding that I would not name him. I am not naming him. He told me because he said he had carried the knowledge of those encounters for 6 years, and he wanted somebody else to carry it for a while. He said, "She was the toughest patient I ever had. She was tough in the way that the very best operators are tough, which is that she did not perform her toughness for anyone. She did not want me to be impressed. She did not want me to admire her. She wanted me to give her the ibuprofen and the referral and to leave her alone. I did that. I have wondered ever since if I should have done that. I think I should have. I think if I had grounded her, I would have taken from her the one thing she had that was keeping her whole. I think she needed to fly. I think the flying was the way she carried the cost. I do not know if that is a good reason to violate regulations. It is the reason I had. I am going to live with it." He paused. He said, "I hope she is okay. I have not seen her in 5 years. I hope somebody is taking care of her. I hope she has somebody who knows the things I know. I hope she is not carrying it alone." I am going to come back to that question, whether she was carrying it alone, at the end of this story. I am not going to answer it yet. I am going to go to Hunter Army Airfield on the evening of November 14th, 2017, in the rain, where Sergeant Major Stanislaw Krashevsky was waiting on the flight line with a piece of paper in his hand. Sergeant Major Stanislaw Krashevsky was 61 years old in November of 2017. He had been in the Army for 41 of those years. He had enlisted in 1976 at the age of 19, out of a steel town in western Pennsylvania that no longer makes steel, and he had spent the first decade of his service in conventional infantry units, the second decade in Ranger battalions, and the last 2 decades in and around the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, where he had never been a pilot. He was not aircrew at all, but where he had been, in succession, a flight line crew chief, a maintenance NCO, a platoon sergeant, a first sergeant, a company sergeant major, and finally the regimental sergeant major, which was the position he held on the evening of November 14th, 2017. He was, by every account I have been able to gather, the kind of senior NCO who is the actual operating system of a military unit. The officers come and go. The senior NCO stays. The senior NCO knows where the bodies are buried because the senior NCO buried most of them. The senior NCO knows which warrant officer is having marriage trouble and which staff sergeant is drinking too much and which captain is going to be a colonel someday and which captain is not. And the senior NCO does not write any of it down because the senior NCO does not have to. The senior NCO carries it. Khrushchevsky carried Lani Akana. He had carried her since 2009, when she had reported to the regiment as a new warrant officer, and he had been her company sergeant major. He had been the one who, in her first week, had taken her aside in the hangar and said to her, "Chief, I am going to give you one piece of advice, and then I am never going to give you another piece of advice for the rest of your career, because you are not going to need it. The advice is this. There are going to be people in this unit who are going to want you to fail because of what you are. There are going to be other people in this unit who are going to want you to succeed because of what you are. Both of those groups of people are wrong about you. You are a pilot. Fly the aircraft. The rest of it will sort itself out, and the people who matter will figure out, eventually, which group they should have been in." She had told me about that conversation in one of the 2 interviews she granted me in 2022. It was one of the very few things she said about her early years in the regiment. She had said, "Khrushchevsky was right. The people who mattered figured it out. The people who did not matter did not figure it out. And they were the people who did not matter, and that was the proof." She had said, "He was the only person at Hunter who ever talked to me like that. Everyone else either pretended I was the same as everybody else or pretended I was different from everybody else. He was the only one who told me the truth, which was that I was different in some ways that were going to matter and the same in the ways that were going to matter more, and that the difference between the two was going to be my job to figure out and not anybody else's." She had said, "I loved him. I love him. He is the closest thing I have had to a father in the Army. He is still alive. He is retired. He lives in South Carolina. I send him a Christmas card every year. He sends me one back. The cards do not say much. They do not need to." Khrushchevsky retired in 2019 at the age of 63, with 43 years of service, 2 Distinguished Service Medals, a Legion of Merit, a Bronze Star, 3 Meritorious Service Medals, and a piece of shrapnel in his left thigh from a place in Iraq he was not allowed to confirm he had been in. I interviewed him in 2023 in his living room in Beaufort, South Carolina, with the windows open and a small dog asleep on his foot. He was, by then, 67 years old. He was still upright. His handshake was still the handshake of a man who had spent 43 years lifting things. He gave me 90 minutes. He told me, at the start of the 90 minutes, that he would talk to me about Lani Akana on 3 conditions: that I would not ask him about classified operations, that I would not ask him about other pilots by name, and that I would tell him, at the end, what I thought the story was about. I agreed to all 3. At the end of the 90 minutes, he asked me what I thought the story was about, and I told him, and he looked at me for a long time, and then he said, "That's about right. You can write it. I am writing it. I am going to tell you, at the end, what I told him. But first I am going to tell you what happened on the evening of November 14th, 2017, on the flight line at Hunter Army Airfield, in the rain. The sea, C-17 carrying Lani Akana home from Germany landed at Hunter at approximately 1943 local on the evening of November 14th. She had been in transit, by then, for 11 days since the flight. She had spent the first 3 days in the ICU waiting room at Landstuhl. She had spent the next 8 days at a temporary billet at Ramstein, where the regiment had told her to stay until they figured out which transport to put her on, and where she had, by her own account, slept for the first time on the night of November 9th, 6 full nights after the flight, and then slept for 14 hours straight. The C-17 ride home had been uneventful. She had ridden as a passenger, in the cargo bay, on a jump seat. There had been no casualties on the return flight. She had read a book, a paperback novel she had bought at the Ramstein PX, which she later told me she had not been able to remember the plot of by the time she finished it. She had drunk water. She had not eaten. She had landed at Hunter at 1943. It was raining when the C-17 landed. It had been raining at Hunter for 2 days. November on the Georgia coast can be like that. A slow soaking rain out of a low gray sky, 60 degrees Fahrenheit, no wind, the kind of weather that makes the asphalt of a flight line look like a black mirror. She came down the ramp of the C-17 with her go bag over her shoulder and her flight suit on and a Gore-Tex jacket she had borrowed from somebody at Ramstein and not yet returned. Krzyzewski was standing at the bottom of the ramp. He was in his service uniform, not his utility uniform. Army service uniform, the blue dress version, with the ribbons, with the rank, with the regimental crest, with a black raincoat over it that he had unbuttoned because he wanted her to see the uniform. He was bareheaded in the rain. His hat was tucked under his left arm. In his right hand, he was holding a single sheet of paper, folded once, inside a clear plastic sleeve to keep the rain off it. There was no one else on the flight line. There should have been. Normally, when a pilot comes back from a deployment of that nature, there is at least a duty officer and probably a small reception of squadron mates and possibly family. There was none of that. Krzyzewski had cleared the line. He had told the duty officer to stay inside. He had told the squadron commander, who had wanted to be there, that he would handle it personally and that the squadron commander could meet with Chief Akana the next morning at 0800. The squadron commander, who was a smart man, had said yes, sir, even though Krzyzewski, as a sergeant major, did not outrank him by any conventional measure. The flight line was empty except for the 2 of them and the C-17, which was already powering down behind her. She walked down the ramp. She saw him. She stopped at the bottom of the ramp, set her go-bag down on the wet asphalt, came to attention, not the casual attention of an aviator greeting a senior NCO, but the formal attention of a soldier reporting, and saluted him. He returned the salute. He said, "Chief Akana, welcome home." She said, "Sergeant Major." He said, "I have something for you. I am going to give it to you here, because here is where it should be given to you, and not in an office. I am going to read it to you first, because you are tired, and I do not want you to have to read it standing up in the rain." She said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He took the plastic sleeve out from under his arm. He opened it. He took the single sheet of paper out. He unfolded it. He held it up in the rain. The rain was very light, almost a mist, and the paper did not immediately get wet, and he read it. The paper was a recommendation for the Distinguished Flying Cross. The recommendation had been written by Lieutenant Colonel Marcus McCready, USN, from his hospital bed at Landstuhl, dictated to a nurse, signed by him on November 10th, transmitted by encrypted email to the commanding officer of the 160th SOAR on November 11th, endorsed by the commanding officer on November 12th, endorsed by the commanding general of United States Army Special Operations Command on November 13th, and walked across the flight line by Krzyzewski on November 14th to be read to Lani Akana in the rain. The citation was approximately 400 words long. I have seen it. It is in her file. It is unclassified at the secret level, which means that I cannot quote most of it here, but I can tell you what it said in general terms. It said that Chief Warrant Officer 3 Lani K. Akana, on the night of 2 to 3 November 2017, in the Syrian Arab Republic, had executed a combat search and rescue mission under conditions of extreme duress, with 7 personnel evacuated on the skids and cargo platform of an MH-6 helicopter rated for 2 passengers, over a flight distance of approximately 117 nautical miles at 30 feet above ground level, in the face of an enemy threat, with an aircraft commander incapacitated with fuel margins reduced to below 2% on landing, and with 1 in-flight bird strike that was avoided by an evasive maneuver of exceptional skill. It said that her actions had directly resulted in the survival of all 7 evacuated personnel. It said that her demonstration of aeronautical skill, of moral courage, of tactical judgment, and of fidelity to the soldiers and sailors she was charged with extracting was in the highest traditions of United States Army aviation. It recommended her for the Distinguished Flying Cross with Valor device. It was signed by Marcus McCready, by the regimental commander, and by the 4-star general at USASOC. Krashevsky read all 400 words. He read them slowly. He read them in the rain. He did not look up from the page while he read them. When he was done, he folded the paper, put it back in the plastic sleeve, put the plastic sleeve back under his arm, and looked at her. She was still at attention. The rain had soaked through the shoulders of her flight suit. Her hair, pulled back, was wet. There was water on her face. Some of it was rain. He said, "Chief, the award has been approved. You will receive it at a ceremony in the spring, at a date to be determined, at the discretion of the commanding general. Until then, you are released to your quarters. You are on convalescent leave for 14 days, effective immediately. You will not report to the squadron until 0800 on the 29th. Do you understand?" She said, "I understand, Sergeant Major." He said, "Chief, I am going to say one more thing to you, and then I am going to go inside, and you are going to go to your quarters, and we are not going to talk about any of this again." She said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He said, "I have been in this army for 41 years. I have seen a lot of pilots. I have seen some pilots do some things I did not think pilots could do. I have read a lot of citations. I have read citations for men who were dead by the time the citation was written. I have read citations for men who deserved them and citations for men who did not deserve them and citations for men who deserved more than the citation was permitted to say. I have not, in 41 years, read a citation that was, in my professional judgment, more deserved than the one I just read to you. I want you to know that. I want you to know that I know that. I want you to know that the man who wrote it knows that. I want you to know that the 4 men above him who endorsed it know that. I want you to know that the people who matter in this regiment and in this army know what you did. The medal is going to be a piece of metal on a ribbon. The medal is not the thing. The thing is what you did. The thing is in you. Nobody can take it out of you. Nobody can add to it. You have it. You will have it for the rest of your life. Do you understand?" She said, "Yes, Sergeant Major." He said, "Chief, one more thing. The man who wrote the citation, Lieutenant Colonel McCready. I have known him for 9 years. I have known you for 8 years. I know what happened in the briefing room in August of 2015. I know because McCready told me, in 2016, when he came to me to ask my advice about something else, and the something else turned out to be a way of asking me how he could undo what he had said in the briefing room without saying out loud that he wanted to undo it. I did not give him my advice that day. I told him to figure it out himself. I am telling you now because I want you to know that he has been trying to figure it out, in his own way, badly, for 2 years. And the citation he wrote from his hospital bed is the closest he has come. It is not enough. It will never be enough. He knows that. He is not asking you to consider it enough. He is asking you to accept it as what he had to give. Do you understand? She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Yes, Sergeant Major. I understand." He said, "Good. Pick up your bag, Chief. Go to your quarters. Sleep. I will see you in 2 weeks." She picked up her bag. She did not move immediately. She stood there for about 5 seconds in the rain, holding her bag, looking at him. Then she said, very quietly, "Sergeant Major, thank you." 5. The 5th thank you I know about. He nodded. He did not say anything back. She turned, and she walked across the flight line, in the rain, with her bag over her shoulder, toward the building where the warrant officer quarters were. And Sergeant Major Stanislaw Kraszewski stood at the bottom of the ramp of the C-17 and watched her go until she was inside the building and the door had closed behind her. Then he put his hat on his head. Then he buttoned his raincoat. Then he walked across the flight line in the opposite direction to his truck, and he got in his truck, and he drove home to his wife. And he did not tell her, that night or any other night, what he had read on the flight line in the rain. He told me, in 2023, that he had never spoken the words of the citation out loud again after that evening. He said that he had read them once, to the person they were about, and that one reading was the reading the citation was for, and that any subsequent reading would have diluted it. He said, "Some things are said one time. You say them right, you do not say them again. The citation was a one-time thing. I said it the right way. I did not say it again. I am not going to say it again now. You are going to have to make do with my paraphrase." I am making do with his paraphrase. The full citation is in her file. It is, by my count, the 3rd Distinguished Flying Cross awarded to a woman in the United States Army for a single combat action, and the 1st awarded to a woman aviator in the Special Operations community. It was presented to her on April 23, 2018, at a small ceremony at Hunter Army Airfield by the commanding general of the 160th SOAR, with no press in attendance, with no family member present. She had asked her Aunt Pua not to fly out, on grounds that the trip was expensive and that the ceremony would be short, and Pua had honored the request because Pua honored Lani's requests. And with approximately 18 people in the room, of whom one was Stanislaw Kraszewski and one was Eric Vandermeer, and one, in the back row, in his service dress whites, on his first day out of physical therapy and walking with a cane, was Marcus McCready. She did not look at McCready during the ceremony. She did not look at him afterward, either. She accepted the medal from the commanding general. She shook the commanding general's hand. She returned to her seat. She sat through the closing remarks. She stood when the room was called to attention. She walked out of the room when the general walked out of the room, and she went directly to her car in the parking lot and drove to her apartment and put the medal in a drawer in her bedroom. And, by the account of the one person who has ever seen the inside of that drawer, her Aunt Pua, who visited her in 2019, has never taken it out again. The drawer contains, by Pua's description, the Distinguished Flying Cross, a small jade pendant that had belonged to Lani's mother, a photograph of Lani's father in his Marine Corps dress blues, and a small carved wooden fishing lure about 2 inches long, painted blue and white, with a single rusted hook. Pua told me about the drawer in 2024 on the porch of the Yellow House on Kilauea Avenue in Hilo, with the rain coming down on the metal roof in a way that I have come to understand is the dominant sound of that island. I asked Pua if she knew what the lure was. She said, "Of course I know what the lure is. The lure is the answer to your question." I asked her what my question was. She said, "You will tell me when you ask it. I am going to tell you about the lure now." But before I tell you about the lore, I have to tell you about February 11th, 2018, and the yellow sheet of paper and the 4 words, and the package that arrived at Lani Akana's apartment in Savannah, Georgia, on a Sunday morning, postmarked from Virginia Beach, with no return address and no note inside except for the 4 words on the yellow paper and an object wrapped in tissue. That is the next part of the story. The package arrived on the morning of Sunday, February 11th, 2018, at the apartment Lani Akana rented on the 2nd floor of a converted Victorian house on East Gaston Street in Savannah, Georgia, about a 15-minute drive from Hunter Army Airfield. She lived alone. She had lived alone in that apartment for 4 years. She had no roommates, no boyfriend, no cat, no dog, no plants that required watering. She had a coffee maker, a single armchair, a bed, a small dining table with 2 chairs of which only one had ever been used, a bookshelf with approximately 60 books on it, and a kitchen that she used to make coffee and to reheat takeout and, occasionally, on Sunday mornings, to fry an egg. She was frying an egg when the doorbell rang. She turned off the burner. She went down the narrow staircase to the front door of the house. The package was on the porch. The mailman was already back in his truck. The package was small, about the size of a paperback book, wrapped in brown paper, addressed in blue ballpoint pen in a handwriting she did not immediately recognize, with a return address that was simply VB in the upper left corner, with no street, no zip code, no name. She picked up the package. She brought it upstairs. She put it on the dining table. She finished frying her egg. She ate the egg, standing at the counter, with a piece of toast and a cup of coffee, in approximately 4 minutes. She washed the plate. She washed the pan. She washed the cup. She put them in the drying rack. She wiped down the counter. She sat down at the dining table. She looked at the package. She told me about this morning in 2022, in the second of the 2 interviews she granted me. She told me about it in a level of detail that I did not ask for, and that she gave me unprompted, and I remember thinking, while she was telling me, that the level of detail was the point. She was telling me how slowly she had moved. She was telling me how long it had taken her to open the package after she knew the package was there. She said, "I knew who it was from. I knew before I picked it up. I knew because I had been waiting for it for 3 months, and I had not known I was waiting for it until I saw it on the porch." VB was Virginia Beach. The only person who would send me a package from Virginia Beach with no name on it was McCready. I knew the package was from him. I knew the package was a thing. I did not know what kind of thing. I did not want to open it without being ready to open it. So I ate my egg first. Then I sat down. Then I looked at it for a while. I think I looked at it for about 20 minutes before I opened it. She said, "I have thought a lot about why I waited the 20 minutes. I think it was because I knew that whatever was inside the package was going to require me to do something, and I wanted to have a clear head before I did it. I wanted to have eaten. I wanted to have sat down. I wanted to have looked at the thing as an unopened object for long enough that, when I opened it, I would not be surprised by it. I would have already imagined every possible thing that could be inside it. And then whatever was actually inside it would be only the actual thing, and not the thing plus the surprise." She said, "That is how I dealt with most of the difficult things in my life. I sat with them, unopened, for a long time. Then I opened them. Then I did what needed to be done." After 20 minutes, she opened the package. Inside the package was a small jewelry box, of the kind that holds a pair of cufflinks or a tie clip, made of dark blue cardboard, hinged. Inside the jewelry box, resting on a piece of white cotton, was a set of Master Aviator wings. United States Naval Aviator, Master Grade. The gold was slightly worn at the edges. The pin on the back was straight but had been used. They were not new wings. They were the wings off a uniform. The wings off his uniform. Folded under the cotton was a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded twice, about the size of a playing card when folded. She took the wings out of the box. She held them in her left palm for a moment. Then she set them down on the table next to the box. Then she unfolded the yellow paper. On the yellow paper, in the same blue ballpoint pen as the address, in the same handwriting, were 4 words. The 4 words were, "I was wrong. Thank you." That was the entire note. No signature, no date, no salutation. She sat at the dining table looking at the yellow paper for, by her own estimate, about 10 minutes. Then she folded the yellow paper back along its original creases. Then she put the yellow paper back in the jewelry box under the cotton. Then she put the wings back on top of the cotton. Then she closed the jewelry box. Then she stood up. Then she walked to the bedroom. Then she opened the top drawer of the small dresser next to her bed. Then she placed the jewelry box in the drawer. Then she closed the drawer. Then she walked back to the dining table. Then she sat down. Then she cried, for the second time in this story that I am aware of, for approximately 2 minutes, with her hands flat on the table on either side of where the package had been, not making any sound. Then she stopped crying. Then she got up, washed her face at the kitchen sink, made another cup of coffee, sat down in the armchair, picked up a book, and read until lunchtime. That was what she did on the morning of February 11th, 2018, when Marcus McCrady's apology arrived in her hands. I want to talk about the 4 words for a minute. I was wrong. Thank you. McCrady had been a graduate of the United States Naval Academy. He had a degree in English literature from there. He had, later in his career, completed a master's degree at the Naval War College in National Security Affairs. He was, by every account I have been able to gather, a literate man, a careful writer, a person who could, when the occasion required it, produce paragraphs of considerable elegance. He had written the 400-word citation for her Distinguished Flying Cross from a hospital bed in Germany, dictated to a nurse, in a single sitting, and the citation was, when I read it, the work of a man who knew how to put words together. He had 4 months between the flight and the package. He had 4 months in which to figure out what to write to her. He could have written a letter. He could have written a long, careful, elegant letter. He could have explained himself. He could have apologized in detail. He could have laid out, paragraph by paragraph, what he had said in the briefing room in August of 2015 and why he had said it, and what he had come to understand in the 2 years and 3 months since, and what the flight had taught him, and what he wanted her to know. He did not do that. He wrote 4 words. I have thought about why he wrote 4 words for a long time. I have a theory. The theory is this. McCrady knew that anything he wrote would be read by her, and would be weighed by her, and would be answered by her, even if only in the privacy of her own head, and that the weighing and the answering would cost her something. The longer the letter, the more it would cost her. A long letter would have demanded a long reading. A long reading would have demanded a long sitting with. A long sitting with would have demanded a long response, even if the response was only internal. He did not want to demand anything from her. He had spent 2 years and 3 months trying to figure out how to apologize without demanding anything from her in return, which is to say, how to apologize in a form that left her under no obligation to acknowledge the apology, to accept it, to forgive him, to write back, to think about him at all. He had to write something. The wings required a note. The wings without a note would have been a riddle. The wings with a long note would have been a demand. 4 words was the minimum that could accompany the wings without being a riddle, and the maximum that could accompany the wings without being a demand. I was wrong. That was the acknowledgement of what he had said in the briefing room in August of 2015. He did not specify what he had been wrong about. He did not need to. She knew. He knew she knew. He was not going to insult her by spelling it out. Thank you. That was for the flight. He did not specify what he was thanking her for. He did not need to. She knew. He knew she knew. He was not going to insult her by spelling it out. The wings were the third part of the message, and the wings, in some ways, were the most important part, and the wings did not require any words at all to communicate what they communicated, which was the highest qualification I hold as an officer in the United States Navy. The qualification that distinguishes me from a junior aviator and that I worked 22 years to earn, I am giving to you, because what you did on the night of November 3rd, 2017, was the work of a master aviator, and you are a master aviator, and I am acknowledging it by putting into your hand the only piece of metal I own that can say so. Naval aviator wings and Army aviator wings are not the same. They are not interchangeable. She could not pin his wings on her uniform. She could not wear them in any capacity. The wings were not for wearing. The wings were a symbol, and the symbol was unmistakable, and the symbol was the part of the message that, when she opened the package and saw them resting on the cotton, made her wait 20 minutes before she read the note. She knew, when she saw the wings, what the note was going to say. The note said it. She cried for 2 minutes. Then she put it away. She did not write back. She did not call. She did not, by the count of every person I have asked, ever again exchange any communication of any kind with Marcus McCready, with one exception that I will get to in a moment. She did not need to. The wings were the closing of the ledger. The 4 words were the receipt. She did not owe him an answer, and he did not expect one, and the absence of an answer was itself the answer, and both of them understood the answer in the same way, and the matter was concluded between them on the morning of February 11th, 2018, in an apartment on East Gaston Street in Savannah, Georgia, in approximately 10 minutes of silence at a dining table, and it has been concluded ever since. The one exception was a phone call. The phone call took place on the evening of April 23, 2018, the same day as the medal ceremony at Hunter, approximately 6 hours after the ceremony ended. I know about the phone call from 2 sources. One is Marcus McCready himself, who I interviewed in 2021, a year before his death from pancreatic cancer in November of 2022, at his home in Virginia Beach, where he was at that point in palliative care and had approximately 8 months to live, although I did not know it at the time and he did not tell me. He told me about the phone call in a single short paragraph, which I will give you in a moment. The other source is the call detail records from Lani Akana's personal cell phone for the month of April 2018, which she provided to me, voluntarily, with no redactions, in a manila envelope, with no comment, at the end of our second interview in 2022. I did not ask her for them. She had prepared them in advance of the interview. She handed them to me as I was leaving. She said, "You are going to want these. I am giving them to you because you are going to write about him, and you should have the records." The records show one outgoing call from her phone to his number on April 23, 2018, at 21:47 Eastern Daylight Time. The call lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds. That is the only direct communication between the two of them in the call records for that month, or for any month before or after that I was able to obtain. McCready told me about the call as follows. He said, "She called me from her car. She was sitting in the parking lot of her apartment building in Savannah. I could tell she was in her car because I could hear the engine running. She was not driving. She was parked. The engine was running because the air conditioner was on. It was April in Georgia. It was warm." He said, "She said, 'Sir, this is Akana.' I said, 'Chief, thank you for calling.' She said, 'I am calling because I wanted to say one thing to you, and I wanted to say it on the same day as the medal, because the medal is the thing that makes the saying possible.' I said, 'Yes, Chief.' She said, 'Sir.' The wings were enough. The 4 words were enough. I am not writing back, because writing back would be more than enough, and more than enough would not be a kindness to either of us. I am calling because I wanted you to hear my voice say that I received them and that I understood them. That is all I wanted to say. I am not going to say anything else. I am going to hang up now. Out." And then she hung up. He said, "I held the phone in my hand for a long time after she hung up. I think I held it for 10 minutes. I sat in my study. The phone was still in my hand. My wife came in and asked me if I was okay. I said I was okay. I did not tell her about the call. I did not tell anyone about the call until I told you, just now, in this room, almost 3 years later." He said, "I have thought about what she said to me on that call almost every day since. The phrase that stays with me is 'more than enough' would not be a kindness to either of us. I think she understood, in a way I had not fully understood until she said it, that the apology economy between two people who have hurt each other in the way I hurt her can become its own injury. The endless circling back, the additional words, the second letter, the third letter, the conversation, the explanation, all of that can become a way of staying inside the wound. She did not want to stay inside the wound. She wanted to close it. She closed it. She closed it with one phone call. She let me close it too. That was a generosity I had no right to expect." He said, "I was not a good man to her in 2015. I have been trying to be a better man since 2017. I do not know if I have succeeded. I think she gave me the chance to succeed. I think she did it for her own reasons, not for mine. I am grateful for the chance regardless. I will be grateful for it for as long as I have left." He paused. He said, "How long do you think this story will take you to write?" I said, "A few years." He said, "Take your time. I am glad somebody is doing it. I am not going to ask to read it. I do not need to read it. I trust you." That was the end of our interview. I did not know he had cancer. I learned about the cancer when his obituary appeared in the Virginian Pilot on November 14th, 2022, almost exactly 5 years after Krzyzewski had stood on the flight line at Hunter and read the citation in the ring. I drove from my home in Maryland to Virginia Beach for the memorial service. There were approximately 300 people there, mostly Navy, many of them in uniform, several of them flag officers. The Chief of Naval Operations sent a representative. The commanding officer of SEAL Team 6 sent a representative. Lani Akana was not in attendance. I asked, later, whether she had been notified. The answer I got, from a person I will not name who handled the funeral arrangements, was that she had been notified by the family, by personal phone call, on the morning of November 10th, the day after McCready died, and that she had thanked the caller, had asked the caller to convey her condolences to McCready's wife, had declined to attend the service, and had sent, by FedEx, arriving the morning of the service, a small package addressed to Mrs. McCready, containing the set of Master Aviator wings he had sent her in February of 2018, and a single sheet of yellow legal paper, folded twice, on which was written, in black ballpoint pen, in her handwriting, 4 words. The 4 words were, "He was a master. Mrs. McCready, who I have not interviewed and will not interview, kept the wings. She placed them on her husband's headstone at the time of his interment. They are not there anymore. Somebody took them, or the cemetery removed them, or the weather got them. I do not know." The yellow paper, by the account of the person who handled the funeral arrangements, Mrs. McCready kept and put in a small wooden box on her husband's desk, where, as far as I know, it remains. That is the end of what I am going to say about Marcus McCready. He was not the subject of this story. He was a man in this story. He was the man who had said the thing in the briefing room, and the man who had been on the cargo platform, and the man who had written the citation, and the man who had sent the wings, and the man who had received the phone call, and the man who had died of cancer at the age of 53 with 8 months less to live than he thought he had. He did some things in his life that were not honorable, and he did some things in his life that were, and the ratio between them improved over time. which is the most that can be said about most of us, and which is more than can be said about some. I think he was probably a better man at the end than he was at the beginning. I think Lani Akana had something to do with that, although I do not think she would accept the credit, and I do not think she would want me to give it to her, and I am giving it to her anyway, in this book, because she is not going to read this book, and because somebody should give her the credit, and because the somebody is me, and the giving is now. I am going to talk about the lure now. The lure was carved by Henry Akana, Lani's father, in the spring of 1991, in the workshop behind the small house in Hilo where the family lived at the time, from a piece of koa wood approximately 3 inches long and 3/4 of an inch thick, that he had cut from a larger piece he had been saving for a project he had not yet decided on. The decision he made, in the spring of 1991, was to carve a lure for his daughter, who was 6 years old, and who had been asking him for several months whether she could go fishing with him on the boat he worked from. He worked on a longline boat out of Hilo, fishing for tuna and swordfish in the deep water off the Big Island. The boat trips were 3 to 5 days. He had told her she could not go on the boat trips because she was too young, and because the boat trips were dangerous, and because she had school. But he had told her that he would make her a lure, and that the lure would go on the boat with him, and that every fish he caught on the lure would be a fish he caught with her, even though she was at home. He carved the lure over the course of approximately 1 week. He painted it blue and white, in the pattern of a small bait fish he had seen in the harbor. He attached a single hook to it. He attached a small wire leader to the front of it. He showed it to Lani on a Saturday morning in late April. He told her it was hers. He told her he was taking it out on his next trip, which started the following Monday. The next trip started the following Monday, May 6th, 1991. The boat did not come back. The boat was lost at sea, with all 6 hands aboard, in a storm approximately 400 miles southeast of the Big Island, on the night of May 9th, 1991. The wreckage was never found. The bodies were never recovered. The lure was on the boat, on a rod in a rod holder on the stern, baited and ready, which Lani knows because her father had shown it to her, set up that way, before he had loaded it onto the truck on Monday morning. The lure went down with the boat. The lure is somewhere on the floor of the Pacific Ocean, 400 miles southeast of Hilo, in approximately 15,000 feet of water, and it has been there for 33 years. The lure in the drawer in Lani Akana's apartment in Savannah, the lure that her Aunt Pua described to me, the lure that is in the same drawer as the distinguished flying cross, is not that lure. That lure is on the bottom of the ocean. The lure in the drawer is the second lure. Henry Akana, in the spring of 1991, in the week he spent carving the lure for his daughter, made 2 lures. He made them at the same time, from the same piece of koa, with the same paint, with the same kind of hook and leader. He made the second one because he was a careful man and he had extra wood, and he thought one of the lures might get lost or damaged on the boat, and he wanted to have a spare. He gave the first one to Lani on Saturday morning. He took the first one with him on Monday. He left the second one on the workbench in the workshop, intending to take it on his next trip, which never happened. The second lure was found by Pua in the workshop in the weeks after the boat was lost, when she came over to help Lani's mother go through Henry's things. Pua kept the second lure. She did not give it to Lani at the time, because Lani was 6, and because the first lure was what Lani knew about, and because Pua thought, with the wisdom that some people are born with and that some people earn, that the second lure was a thing that should wait. Pua waited for 30 years. In 2021, when Pua was 72 years old and starting to think about what she had and who she was going to give it to and when, she sent the second lure to Lani in Savannah with a short letter, which I have not read and will not ask to read, but the substance of which Pua described to me on her porch in 2024. The substance of the letter as Pua described it, was, "Your father made 2 of these. The other one is on the bottom of the ocean. This one is for you. It is for you because you have, in your life, done the thing he was doing. You have carried people through bad weather. You have come home. He did not come home. You did. This lure is the one that came home. I am sending it to you because I think you are ready to have it. Aloha. Auntie Pua." Lani received the lure in the mail in the spring of 2021. She put it in the drawer with the distinguished flying cross. That is where it is now. I asked Pua, on her porch, why Lani had put the lure in the drawer with the medal. Pua looked at me for a long time. The rain was on the roof. The dog at her feet was asleep. She said, "Mr. Hatch, you have been asking me questions for 3 days. You have asked me about my niece's childhood and about her mother and about her father and about her training and about the night in Syria and about the man McCready and about the medal and about the wings and about the phone call and now about the lure. You have asked me good questions. You are a careful man. I have answered all of your questions. I have one question for you now, and when you answer it, I will tell you why the lure is in the drawer with the medal." She said, "What is your question for me?" "The real one. The one you came here to ask. Not the one about the lure. The one underneath it." I sat on her porch for a minute. Then I said, "My question is whether she is okay." Pua nodded. She said, "That is the right question. That is the question the flight surgeon asked you to ask. I know he asked you to ask it because you told me about him last night, and I could see, when you were telling me, that you were carrying his question for him. You are a good man to carry his question. I will answer it. Then I will tell you about the lure. Then you can go home." She said, "My niece is okay. She is not happy in the way that the magazines think people should be happy. She is not married. She does not have children. She does not have, by the count of the things that get counted, very many friends. She lives in a small house here in Hilo, 2 streets over from this house, that she bought in 2021 when she retired from the army. She is 39 years old. She works at the airport in Hilo as a flight instructor for the civil aviation community. She teaches people how to fly small airplanes. She is paid much less than she was paid in the army. She does not care. She has enough. She fishes on the weekends, from a small boat she keeps in the harbor, with a rod that was her father's, with lures she buys at the store. She does not use the lure in the drawer. The lure in the drawer is not for fishing. She catches her own fish. She said, she comes to this house for dinner on Sunday nights. She has come every Sunday night since she moved back, for 3 years, except for the Sundays when she has been off island, which has been about 10 Sundays total. She eats with me. We talk about small things. She helps me with the dishes. She drives home. She goes to bed. She gets up the next morning and goes to the airport and teaches another person how to fly an airplane. That is her life. She said, she is okay. She is not carrying it alone. She is carrying it with me. She has been carrying it with me since she was 6 years old, and the carrying has changed shape many times. And right now the shape is Sunday dinner, and the lure in the drawer, and the medal in the same drawer, and the small house 2 streets over, and the rod that was her father's, and the boat in the harbor, and the students at the airport who do not know who she is, who think she is a Hawaiian lady who teaches Cessnas, who are not wrong. That is the shape now. The shape will change again. I will not be alive for all of the shape changes. Somebody else will carry her after me. She will let them when the time comes. She knows how to let people carry her. She learned how when she was 6. It is the thing she is best at after the flying. The flying you have written about. The letting people carry her, you have not written about. You should write about it. It is the more important thing. She said, now I will tell you about the lure and the medal in the same drawer. She said, the lure is the thing her father gave her. The medal is the thing the army gave her. The lure is for the daughter she was. The medal is for the pilot she became. The daughter and the pilot are the same person. The drawer is the place where she keeps the same person. She does not look in the drawer very often. She does not need to. She knows what is in it. She knows that the daughter and the pilot are in the same drawer, in the same small space, touching each other, because she put them there. She put them there because she understood, at some point that I do not know the date of, and that she has never told me the date of, that the pilot was made out of the daughter. The pilot did not replace the daughter. The pilot was what the daughter became. The lure her father gave her and the medal the four-star general gave her are the same object, in two different forms, separated by 27 years and 4,500 miles of ocean. She knows this. She does not say it out loud. She does not have to. She put them in the drawer. She said, "That is why the lure is in the drawer with the medal." That is the answer to your question. You can go home now, Mr. Hatch. You have what you came for. I sat on her porch for another minute. I did not get up to go home. She did not tell me again to go home. She let me sit. After a minute, I said, "Auntie Pua, may I ask one more thing?" She said, "You may ask." I said, "Does she know I am writing this?" Pua smiled. She said, "Of course she knows. She told me 3 years ago that you would come. She told me that a man named Hatch would come, and that he would ask me questions, and that I should answer them. She told me to answer them because she could not answer them herself, and because somebody should, and because the somebody was going to be me, and the answering was going to be now. She gave you her phone records in 2022. She gave you the introduction to Krashevsky. She gave you the introduction to the flight surgeon. She gave you the introduction to me. She has been giving you this book for 3 years. She is not going to read it. She is going to know that you wrote it. She is going to know because I am going to tell her on a Sunday night, over dinner, in about 6 months, when you are finished, that the man Hatch finished his book and that the book is good. She is going to nod. She is going to help me with the dishes. She is going to drive home. She is going to go to bed. She is going to get up the next morning and go to the airport and teach another person how to fly an airplane. That is going to be her response to the book. Do you understand? I said, "Yes, Auntie. I understand." She said, "Good. Now you can go home." I went home. I want to tell you, before I close this, one more thing. When I told Sergeant Major Krashevsky in his living room in Beaufort in 2023 what I thought this story was about, which was the price he had asked me to name at the start of our 90 minutes, I told him this. I told him that I thought the story was about a woman who had been told, in a briefing room in Georgia in August of 2015, that she was not the same as the men she flew with, and who had decided, in that room, not to argue. I told him that I thought she had not argued because she had understood, in a way that most of us never understand about ourselves, that the argument was not hers to make. The argument was the army's to make, and the men's to make, and the country's to make, and her job was not to make the argument, but to do the work, and to do the work so well, and so quietly, and for so long, that one day the argument would be over without anyone having had to win it. I told him I thought she had done that. I told him I thought she had done it in the air over Syria in November of 2017, and that she had done it in a drawer in Savannah in February of 2018, and that she was still doing it. On Sunday nights in Hilo, with her aunt, in a yellow house on Kilauea Avenue, in 2023. I told him I thought the story was about the cost of doing that work, and about the people who help you carry the cost, and about the very small number of people in any life who actually know what the cost was, and about the responsibility of the people who know to remember. I told him I thought I was, by writing this book, one of the people who knew. I told him that he was one of the people who knew. I told him that the flight surgeon was one, and that Reyes was one, and that the crew chief was one, and that Pua was one, and that McCready, before he died, had been one. I told him that the count of people who knew was probably under 20 in the whole world, and that some of them were going to die in the next 10 or 15 years, and that when the last of them died, the knowing would die with them unless somebody wrote it down. I told him I was writing it down. He listened to all of that without interrupting me. He was sitting in his armchair. The dog was on his foot. The windows were open. A cardinal was making noise somewhere in the yard. When I finished, he was quiet for about 30 seconds. Then he said, "That's about right. You can write it. That is the permission under which I have written this book." I am the last voice in this story, and I want to be careful about how I use it. I did not fly the helicopter. I was not on the skids. I was not in the briefing room. I was not in the surgical bay or the ICU waiting room or on the flight line in the rain or at the dining table in Savannah on the morning of February 11th, 2018. I was, on the night of November 2nd into November 3rd, 2017, asleep in a house in Maryland, in a bed next to a woman who is no longer my wife, having no idea that any of this was happening, having no idea that the woman whose story I would spend the next 7 years of my life trying to tell was, at that moment, at a hover at 30 feet AGL over the Syrian desert, with a quarter tank of fuel and a side slip in her head that she had not yet executed and that would, when she executed it, save a man's life she did not know she was saving. I came to this story late. I came to it the way most writers come to most stories, which is by accident, through a series of conversations with other people that gradually narrowed into a single person, who turned out to be the person the story was about, and who turned out, when I finally reached her, to be willing to give me, through her aunt and her sergeant major and her flight surgeon and her phone records and her 2 interviews and her permission to keep going, the materials I would need to write the story without ever having to write the story herself. She did that on purpose. I understand now that she did it on purpose. She wanted the story to exist. She did not want to be the one to tell it. She found a person who would tell it, and she gave the person what he needed, and she made it possible for him to do the work, and she did not, herself, write a word. That is the kind of person she is. She does the work that needs to be done, and she lets the credit go where it needs to go, and she does not stand in the way of the telling, and she does not insist on being the teller. She arranges the conditions. She steps back. She lets it happen. She did it in the air over Syria. She did it in a drawer in Savannah. She did it on Sunday nights in Hilo for 3 years while I drove around the country interviewing people about her. She is doing it right now, while you read this, by being 2 streets over from her aunt's house, at her own small kitchen table, drinking coffee, looking out the window at the rain on the metal roof, not thinking about this book, thinking about the student she is going to take up in a Cessna 172 at 0900 Hawaii time, who is 44 years old, who is a high school math teacher, who has wanted to learn to fly since he was 12, who does not know that the woman who is going to teach him to fly today is the woman who carried 7 men out of the Syrian desert in November of 2017 at 30 feet above ground level with 26 seconds of fuel remaining. The math teacher does not need to know. The math teacher is going to learn to fly. He is going to be a good pilot, or a mediocre pilot, or a pilot who quits after 20 hours. Whichever of those he is, the woman teaching him is going to teach him the same way. She is going to ask him correctly. He is going to give her what he has. She is going to thank the airplane, quietly, with her hand on the door frame, after the lesson, when the math teacher has walked back to his car. That is what she does now. That is what she will do tomorrow. That is what she will do for as many years as her neck and her right hand and her eyes allow her to do it. And when one of those things finally stops her, she will stop, and she will fish from the small boat in the harbor with the rod that was her father's and the lure she buys at the store, and she will eat dinner on Sunday nights with her aunt for as long as her aunt is alive. And after her aunt is gone, she will eat dinner on Sunday nights by herself or with someone else, and she will carry what she has been carrying since she was 6 years old, which is the knowledge that the people who go out on the boat do not always come home, and that the ones who do come home owe the ones who do not a particular kind of attention, and that the attention is the work, and the work is the life, and the life is enough. I am writing this in the spring of 2024. I am writing it because the flight surgeon asked me to. I am writing it because Reyes asked me to. I am writing it because Krzyzewski gave me permission. I am writing it because Pua handed it to me on a porch in Hilo with the rain on the metal roof. I am writing it because McCready, 8 months before he died, asked me to take my time, and I have taken my time, and the time is up. I am writing it, mostly, because there is a woman in Hilo, Hawaii, who carried 7 men out of a desert in a helicopter built for 2, and who has never told anyone what it cost her, and who is not going to tell anyone, and who arranged, over the course of 3 years, for somebody else to tell it for her, so that the telling could happen without her having to do it. I am the somebody else. This is the telling. Her name is Lani Akana. She is 39 years old. She teaches people how to fly small airplanes at the airport in Hilo. She is, by the only measure I know how to apply, one of the finest pilots the United States Army has ever produced, and one of the finest human beings I have ever had the privilege of being permitted, at a distance, through intermediaries, with her quiet consent, to know. She is where she is supposed to be. I am grateful to have been allowed to write this down. Aloha, Chief. Out.